We have a special guest, author of the book Being Black and Blue, and former LAP detective, Michael Brox. Thank you for joining us today, Michael.
Thank you for having me, Anthony, and those on the panel. Thank you.
So today we'll be discussing Detective Brox's 35 years of experience in the LAPD, police unions, policy, and training. So we're going to do kind of a Q&A style here today. And the first question is, you live an extraordinary life, going to high school with, you refer to him as Ponytail, who later became Ice-T, and getting to some, memorable times with him. Being a first responder to the Marvin Gaye homicide, a mind-blowing first day that's detailed again in his book, Being Black and Blue. Almost, I would call it almost like a Rocky type story of, being knocked down and getting back up again, as LAPD officer. And I just, first question I want to jump into is, how long did it take you to write this book? And when did you first get your idea for it?
Well, the book actually was a daily write for me. Just to give you a little thing, people, when we did things on the police department, several officers would kind of say, hey, watch out for this officer, watch out for that officer. I think they're keeping notes. They're keeping a little book, so be careful what you say about them. Well, that was me, because from the very first days on the police department, there were more matured officers that said, hey, always keep a camera with you, always take notes about things, because you're going to see things and experience things that you've never seen before, and you may want to reflect back on them. So I kept notes, handwritten notes, because when I started, we didn't have cell phones. When I started, we didn't have computers or anything like that. So basically, I kept a little black book. So the book actually was being written, not to my knowledge, for 35 years. So when I gathered notes, it took me, I was writing the book while I was in my last year of retirement. So it took me about a year and a half or so to actually put it together and get it published.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Kind of adopting, and I see a lot of, Muhammad Ali and different people in the background, that protect yourself at all times mentality, right? With the log book and everything like that.
Well, actually, yes. And because you never know from day to day whether you have friend or foe, people that are within the same organization or outside the organization. And so you wanted to have a documented history of everything you went through for the purposes of memory recollection. And my memory recollection just ended up being some of the pages in this book.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And that's, anybody else that's thinking about writing a book, may want to do the same thing. So one of my next questions is, did you ever get that $80 from Ice-T from that whole Corolla incident?
Well, I got to make just a slight correction on something. Actually, I didn't go to high school with him. I went to a rival high school. We were the other high school in their gymnasium at Crenshaw High School at the time, and we were visiting their school. I wasn't playing because I'm not a basketball player. I played baseball,
right,
and ran track, and we were supporting our basketball team. And when, back in the 70s and the 80s, Crenshaw, they were the team, and we were getting the boots put to us pretty bad, but we still represented our our school. But it didn't matter. You're in their gym, and that's called a form of disrespect. So, that's what happened. And no, I never recovered my dollars from him. I'm going to look him up because I want my money.
That was pretty crazy tale. And then this is something I've always wondered, and I've never asked a police officer this. Do police officers like and watch mob movies like Goodfellas, New Jack City, The Godfather, Gangs in New York, etc.?
Absolutely. And it's problematic. It actually is problematic for them watching these shows because as everything is going on today, and when I was coming up, it almost seemed like life was imitating art, not the other way around.
Right.
And, I can give you a classic example of that. It's an unfortunate incident where someone had to deploy and use a shotgun as a defensive weapon and actually shoot someone. And they were complaining when they shot someone with this shotgun that the person did not go flying in the air across the room.
What?
The officer actually said, our ammo, our shotguns are shit. The sheriff's department has better ammo. They would have blown the guy out of his shoes. So literally, they took the theatrics they've seen on television and put it into real life situation, and they were upset that they didn't see this person who was hit with this projectile from this firearm go flying across the room. So yes, that's the negative about watching television. That's not real life, but we have police officers that actually, equate what
reality.
they see on boob to reality.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting point. I want to interject here because, later on in the book, you talked about how a lot of the police officers that work for LAPD don't live in Los Angeles. They live in the surrounding county. So, I mean, obviously, and I've thought this for years, that that's a big problem in the sense that, it does breed, like kind of like what you were talking about in the book, you don't have any investment in your community, so you don't really care about it. But also seeing negative media images of, Black and brown communities, do you think that for newer officers coming in, do you think that has more of an impact, the negative media portrayal of Black and brown people versus maybe homegrown or an old school? Because, in the 60s, 70s, and 50s, there weren't really, there was, of course, Birth of a Nation that, kind of set the standard for how Black and brown people were going to be seen on film. But there wasn't as much negative media, I don't think, involved in shaping racist ideologies in folks back then. Whereas today, I feel like a lot of it comes from negative portrayal. Do you think that that's something that's valid to say that, this isn't just regular homegrown racism? This is racism that is being manufactured by our popular media today.
Well, there's so many different branches of what you're saying in terms of what people see. Television, this thing is called, programs. Let's remember that term. When you watch a program, I know that people can remember so many things that they see on the news, so many things they see on an athletic field. They can remember names of players and everything else. And, yes, the mind is actually somewhat programmed on what they see on the media, because now you take a 20-year-old, 18, 20, 21-year-old, and now you thrust them into training of a police department. And here's the other programming coming on with the police academy, when they instill what they've seen on television in your psyche as a police officer in what we call our situation simulations in the academy. Example, they say that you're working 77 division, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and you're in an alley and you got this buffed up parolee that you are confronted with, and you're going to have to make decisions on how you're going to deal with him, or he's going to take your gun and kill you with it. Now, you're talking to a 20-and-a-half-year-old or a 21-year-old who has been watching television with the negative portrayals of brown and Black people, and now it does come into the psyche of a brand new officer and those officers that are actually out on the street to give them a negative image of the communities they serve. You never hear them say in the academy, well, you're at Santa Clarita at the Chili's restaurant and something happens. You always hear you're in 77 division, you're in Southeast division, which are in South Los Angeles.
Right.
You're in an alley. They'll never say that you're walking on Beverly Drive or something, or, Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. They'll never say anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
They'll give you this negative connotation and this big buffed out parolee. They talk about incarceration all the time, and predominantly who dominates incarceration are young Black men. So now all of a sudden that does come into your psyche, and that's where the problem is. Also, you're bringing these people in, most of your recruits are coming from a predominantly, well, they're coming from a non-Los Angeles area to police the people of Los Angeles.
Right.
So that's another whole conversation. And I don't know if you want to get into it now, but I've got a whole lot of thoughts and evidence of that. But yes, it does come into play, and it does poison the mind. It does put up a stereotypical, shield in front of you to not trust, to be untrusted, and to treat everyone as suspect versus citizens.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. And I would like, I mean, Anthony, cut me off if you need to, but I mean, I think it's an interesting question to ask. What you said that you had ideas and maybe some stats about the recruitment of LAPD, and you talk about in the book too the OJB and other, other associations that are, supposed to be supporting and Black officers and increasing Black positivity within law enforcement and in the community. What is the barrier? Because I feel like it's a thing everywhere. It's here in Cincinnati. It's the same way. The people that are policing the inside of Cincinnati drive 40 minutes to get home. And it might not be all of them, but an overwhelming majority of them don't live in the same community. The people who are on a beat in Avondale are not living in Avondale, which is a neighborhood, predominantly Black neighborhood in Cincinnati. They just aren't. So what are your thoughts on the what are the hindrances, and like is it an active selection against people from those communities, or is it something more that we need, that the police departments and communities together need to work on to get that image of police work as a positive thing back in young brown and Black folks' mind? This is a viable career. This is a career that matters. You're going to be helping people. Help out your community. Come on, let's do this. Let's do this together.
Well, let me interject there, and I think you just said a key word there: is young community minds. And the problem with Los Angeles Police Department's recruitment is that they start recruiting at an older age. They start recruiting around college, the junior college level or the university level, and they go outside of Los Angeles to do it. 90% of their recruitment is done elsewhere other than right in the heart of Los Angeles. But I think that what would really matter is to turn Los Angeles Police Department and local police departments into viable careers, is to go after the young mind and to go after them early on. And we can do that by getting back into the schools. We had programs called DARE. A DARE program that was washed away. Now, what people saw when DARE was there in the middle schools and below and above is they saw an officer on campus 5 days a week in uniform that was teaching a actual class. And then they saw that the humanist portion of this person, they become mentors, but that program has washed away. So now you don't have that influence, and only time that you see a police officer is whether it's on television, in a media, in a news reel, or as a patrolling force in your neighborhood. But there's no positive about the Los Angeles Police Department. You'll see a billboard here and there, but the actual interaction with young people, it's not there. I started in my career, I became a police officer because watching, Adam 12, and I had a couple of relatives in my community. And being a community guy, that's what I wanted to do. So with that being said, I think that you hit on something there is, stay within your community. And it's best that you have people working in the community that are of the community so that they do have some pride of ownership, I guess you could say, or something to that effect.
We're all DARE kids, actually, in here. We all, experienced DARE growing up and everything. And there's a lot to be said about that. Because there's so much negative media programming out there on social media as well for our younger viewers. All we see is basically bad interaction with the police. And I think that's also painting an unfair image of a lot of police officers in general now. Yes, there's some bad apples, but there's also a lot of people like yourself that got into the police force for the right reasons, wanting to better their communities.
During the time, may I just interject this? During the time that I came up, we had what was called police science in schools. We didn't have DARE, but we had a police officer on campus at the junior high school and at the high school level, and they taught police science. And there were a lot of us in those classes, and this officer, he was there every day, kind of like a DARE officer. The guy would play basketball with us. He'd be at the sporting events. Everybody would walk up to him and respectfully, "Hey, Officer so-and-so." I remember the one was with us. His name was Officer Brown. So, that in itself, those interactions actually mean something. And when we have just not recruitment, because we have a recruitment division, every officer has to go out and reach one. If you want to bring people in, it has to be an all hands on deck approach, where the officers that look like me have to actually do the recruiting, even though they're not a part of recruitment. And it's to share within their churches, within their schools, within their communities, if they still live here, and share that information and message of a positive way to give back to the community and support your families.
Definitely. That's a really great message. Speaking back to your experience of being on the force, there was one chapter, one of the earlier chapters, I think it was chapter 2, when you're talking about when you first were having your background checks right after your time in the academy, where the officer doing the background check made a statement, and I want to see how you feel about this today. And the statement was, you may be disqualified just for lying. And this was when he was referring to a question he asked you about, do you smoke weed or drink?
Well, yeah, looking back, it was hurtful then, and it's still hurtful now, although I do drink now, although I do some things now. But back then, I was trying to be an athlete. I was a church boy. I didn't do those things. I kept my life a certain way. And the mere fact that I grew up in the Pueblo projects of Los Angeles, the mere fact that I lived in LA, and the mere fact that I grew up in Gardena, California, which is predominantly black areas, the simple fact that I told you I didn't do these things, how dare he or anyone, simply because of the color of my skin, tell me that I'm lying. And, the only thing that I could do at that time was there's nothing else I can tell you except the truth. But I hope in your background and visiting the people that know and care for me and the people that I associate with, that you could verify the things that I'm telling you. And I still remember this guy's name to this day. And that's a problem as well, because we all got hired because of affirmative action. We weren't wanted. From the early 70s all the way through the 80s and into the 90s, we had to come on the police department because the government and other actions and other employment, equal opportunity development department forced LAPD to hire a certain number of us because we were underrepresented. So the people that were already there, that were a part of this system, they did not want us there. So they did everything they could to keep us from coming in. Things that we did or things that we said would get us disqualified. But other races, especially male whites or what have you, they could say the same things or have done the same thing, and some of them would get by. So today it has to change. Today I have some ideas that how we can defeat that. A lot of different things how we can do, and I hope we get into some of those things so I can give you my ideas about it.
Well, yeah. Well, let's transition into that since we're talking about it. One of my later questions was going to be, about training. Do we think LAPD trains officers properly? And if not, what would you suggest to address, the problems in the training?
Well, first and foremost, let's get back to, let's just stay with training for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, you're going to give a 21-year-old, think about this for a moment, a 21-year-old, you're going to give them a gun, you're going to give them a set of rules, you're going to give them the power to temporarily take some of your rights away from you. You're going to give them a 21-year-old, you're going to give them a firearm which they can use to protect themselves and others from great bodily injury or death, and to take the life of a human being at 21 years old, and you only train them for 6 months. Doctors, teachers, and everyone else go to a university for upwards to 4 years to get the certificates and the knowledge they need to teach our youth. But you give a 21-year-old, basically right out of high school or a couple of years from high school pass, and you give them 6 months of training and you give them that power. The problem being is that in itself, training needs to be a lot longer. I think police training actually needs to be about, at the very least, is about a year. A physical year, which causes, and a physical year, and you can bring in community-based training, cultural sensitivity, cultural diversity training, training from a medical staff, training from not religious, but clerical people, mental health training. All of that stuff needs to be done during the training process. And you can weed people out during some of these trainings, because we have in-service training, but it's a joke. It's an absolutely joke. It's done over a computer. People are clicking through the modules. They'll get the answer for someone else, so they can just go ahead and click through everything. So get rid of all of that, and training has to come at a longer, more sustained period of time, instead of being rushed through for 6 months and then given to what they call as a training officer out in the field. And they give those stripes away to people like they're just giving a handshake, a golden handshake to people. And therein lies the problem.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, how much training, Eric, did you have to go through before you were given a gun and,
I mean, honestly, it
similar.
depends on the rate. It depends on the rate. So if you're third ID, if you 11 Bravo, or, if you're 0311, these are just infantry terminologies or acronyms for different branches. The training could be anywhere. I mean, you have boot camp first and foremost, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the major differences between the military and Mr. Brock, please correct me if I'm wrong, is the environment. We're stripped away from our community, and we're forced to be, put inside an environment with different people we don't know. So therein lies that that multicultural training is actually just done on the ground between us, right? Between the individuals who are there. That bond is created, through the pain, I would probably say, and I think, another difference is just after boot camp, after you get past the silliness and understanding structure, mindset, mindset is number one, is key. If you don't have the proper mindset, and it's that creative or creation mindset, if you will, your survival mindset kind of kicks in. And I think that's the difference between a 90-year-old in the military and a 90-year-old police officer on the force, is because their mindset is totally different. It's bred in a different environment. We don't go home at night. We don't, go to the gym, or we don't have these particular luxuries to go out and do this. We're stuck in one particular environment. So it is force fed into us for a duration of time. And it could be anywhere from 6 months to 8 months, depending on what you're doing. If you're going SEALs, if you're going to recon, if you're doing pararescue, be up to 18 months, even beyond that. You always consistently train. Training is done almost on a daily basis. And I think that's probably what the police department needs. Maybe local government needs to be removed from the equation, and federal government needs to step in and place in these particular modules and do, as Mr. Brock said, the 18-month, training courses where you have sectionalized training throughout that 18 months. So you get 4 months of multiculturalism, you get 4 months of mental health, you get, a couple of months of, going over your firing procedures, you get more time at the range, the understanding, what is a threat, how to identify a threat, how to investigate, how to carry out those SOPs based upon the information that happens within seconds. Like in the military, the ROEs are different. We can't fire into being fired upon. And that's the training that we go through. And what that means is like, they have to actually shoot at us. Not somebody shooting at a building, not somebody shooting in the air. They have to actually engage you in a combative situation in order for you to return fire, or else, you could go to Leavenworth for the rest of your life. And I think it's that weapons discipline, that kind of changes the game, and going through your escalations of force, which is consistently taught to us, prior to deployment even, and while we're still on deployment, we're in those classrooms, we're consistently training, because we want to make sure that we're not discharging our firearms, just because we're stressed out and anxiety, and it's intense. I mean, it's very intense, not knowing who's who. Mr. Brock is correct. Even in the military, everybody says, the saying is everyone's a threat until they're not. And it's part of your training is to decipher whether or not that person is a threat. And it's body language, it's, tonality, it's everything, packaged all together. But if you don't consistently train, there's no way you can be able to decipher that information.
I want to build on that point. Do we think, Michael, that there's kind of a mentality that's built, or mindset, as you said, as us versus them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I alluded to it earlier, and I thank him for so eloquently talking about the escalation and de-escalation of force training.
Right.
That was beautiful and well stated. But absolutely.
And that's taught during your training as well, isn't it, in the academy? When is that embedded really and pushed, that us versus them mentality that you experienced?
Well, it's from the very beginning, and it's basically, like he said, team building. And you become the member of a team, which is, and you've heard the term, a thin blue line. And that's basically what it all boils down to in this is us versus them. And it's hard as hell to police any city when it is that mentality that's burned into your mind when you're told that, hey, your brother officer as the military, because remember, police work is paramilitary. It really is. Your brother officer in blue, regardless of what you think about him or her, we back each other up. We support each other. And that is where that line comes from, the thin blue line. And it's taught very early on because we're not there, all day as a military person, as you don't wake up and go to sleep together. But we do come together. It's 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, and you're in classes. So you have a specific class on this. I was a member of a class, and our class learned together. We trained together. We wrestled, fought, studied, and did everything together. So that blue line and that family is ingrained in you from the very beginning. And then when you get out in an actual field situation is brand new, they'll remind you of that. Hey, all of these people don't mean anything. What we have to do is back each other up. And, you got my back, I got your back. If I'm in a fight, you better jump in. If you're in a fight, I'm going to jump in. We take care of each other. We're going to go home and see our families, which I understand to a certain extent, yes. But what happens is some of the young molded minds take that too literally and then becomes an us versus them. And I've run into that several times and actually been asked, whose team are you on? I've actually been asked that, when I made decisions that weren't popular with my bosses or what have you.
Wow. That's, yeah. speaking of which, too, it's like, if it is us versus them, um, how come you experience such hatred, even in the academy, right? Being called out of your name, that you allude to, your fellow officers dropping the N-bomb, calling you all types of ridiculous names, and these are supposed to be people that you're supposed to bleed with and ride or die with, right?
Well, as a young and impressionable guy of 21 years old, that's what my thought was exactly from the incidents that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I was confused as a young recruit. I was confused because hell, they say that we're all family. They say that we're all in this together. Yet I'm being belittled. Yet I'm being called, a nigger and all of these other terms that I'm hearing them referred to the people that look like me in society. And then with me personally, then I don't understand the respect for others, and that is what they're building. But yet I remember I was forced to be there. I'm a product of affirmative action. Remember, this police department at one time was predominantly male white.
Right.
And so if they kept it that way, that was okay. But now you start seeing minorities, so-called minorities come in, people, black and brown and females come in and make comments about that they didn't want females. Females couldn't do the job. Black folks weren't as smart, or black folks are going to give people preferential treatment when they work in a black community. Those are the things that we would run into as black officers, and we had to work within an agency that some people in this agency had that mentality. So it was very difficult in those. And I stood up for myself, and asked questions. And then at a time when I got a little bit of seniority on my back, I would stand up and, push against those mentalities that were forced towards me and the people that look like me in the community.
Yeah. That's God. It's such a like. I hate to say it, for lack of a better word, but mind fuck.
And here is the problem that you have with policing, and I'm not saying every police officer, but there you have the problem in policing. People have no reverence. They have no respect for life. And some people on a police department don't have that. If you take the thing that's going on in, I guess it would be Minneapolis, Minnesota, whatever it is, where they so-called defund the police department, or they say they're going to do certain things, you have a whole unit of people that stop working, because what they're saying is we don't want change. What they're saying is we want to do exactly what we've been doing for last year, the years before that, and you're asking us to change. And if we find ourselves siding with the community, showing empathy of a community, then we'll just quit. We'll walk away.
Right.
You see, those are people that are supposedly they're sworn to protect and serve. But yet, when the things don't go the blue way, they want to walk away and quit. So that should tell a lot of people a lot.
So it seems to be like a crisis of consciousness that is predominant within inside the police force. That's very interesting. It's almost like what you experience, Mr. Brock, it sounds more of like a sacrifice in order to serve, which I think is it's kind of backwards. I mean, your service is your sacrifice. You shouldn't have to sacrifice everything, your identity, who you are, and your morality in order to serve. Excuse my language, that is a mind fuck. Sorry.
I couldn't come up with a better term than exactly that.
So I guess my next question is how did you create a mindset in order to endure for 35 years? Like, how did you structure yourself? If you could tell like your young self anything in regards to mental toughness, what would that be?
Well, as I talked about it being a church boy coming up, I had a a minister, a bishop that we came up under, and one of his, right before the afternoon service, he would walk through the congregation, hold his hands out, and say this prayer called others. He would say, "Others, Lord, let us serve others." And that was his prayer to his congregation about others. And as a mother who I had a mother who was a praying woman, who gave me this when I first joined the police department, and she told me never to take this off. Now, I'm not a perfect man, don't get me wrong, but I based that on serving others and serving the people that, and I took that thing about service really serious. So I served with respect and dignity the communities that gave me my start, you know, as a place to live, as a place to shop, as a place to worship, and as a place to befriend others. So my service to others was serious. And that's what I would tell my younger self, is to remember where you came from, who you are, and the things that you were taught when you were younger, and keep that within you while serving as a law enforcement officer in a dynamic city like Los Angeles. Treat everybody with respect and dignity, and treat those as you would like them to treat you or someone in your family. And that's what kept me for 35 years. As it wasn't easy. I did make some mistakes, but my foundation was solid. It really was, in terms of service. I wasn't over officious. If you violated law or you committed a crime against humanity, it was my job to enforce, as a law enforcement officer, to enforce the laws of the land. And that's what I did, and I would do it all again. But the difference was I did it as with much respect as I possibly could for those that I came across. And that's what I would tell my younger self, is just to remember those things, to, police with respect, dignity, and quality through continuous improvement. You know, every day people can improve on who they are and what they do. Just every single day, try to improve on something, of whether the way you talk to people, the way you approach them, you're getting better with your empathy, or whatever. That's what I try to do.
That's serving with reverence. I think that's so important. And I feel, and this might be my optics, so correct me if I'm wrong. You know, I feel like I've seen a lot of officers definitely not with that mindset, and treating suspects like criminals right off the bat. And not thinking about due process, not thinking about them as, this could be a mistake, but I still have to do my job, right? And as you referred to, is that true, for one, or is that mostly from what you refer to as thunder chickens or cowards, which I love that vernacular.
Okay, what the word suspect is exactly what it means. You're suspected of doing something. There is reasonable or cause to believe that you're suspected of doing something.
Right.
But what law enforcement officers, I'm not saying all, but some forget, is that we are not the judge, we're not juries, and what have you. It's our job as preliminary investigators is to gather facts as quickly as we possibly can, and to determine if that person suspected of crime was actually involved in whatever it is that we're investigating. There's a safety factor there as well. Now think about it. You have to think about this. If the person that's wearing a gray shirt with glasses, beards, an African American, and he just crossed this way, and I see someone and they have the bulge in their pocket or what have you, that person may be the suspect. Mm-hmm. He may be suspected of a crime because he's walking the same direction. He has the same orange shirt on, or he has the same striped pants on, or what have you. But you have to approach that cautiously, but do so with respect. Yes, it's going to have to be done safely. There are certain things that you can do, but the thing about it is how you end it once you find out that that person is not who you're looking for. There's ways to explain things. Mm-hmm. There's ways to, as we used to say, dust people off and then let them know why you did what you did and tell them exactly what's going on. You can't just leave people standing there without an explanation. I would think that, I've done that in the past where I have stopped the wrong person.
Right.
The person had the trench coat on. The person had the full beard. The person was carrying the red purse. And I stopped that person, but it turned out to be the wrong person. But you owe it to that person to explain to them why you stopped them.
Mm.
You owe that to them, and to identify yourself and to explain your actions. A lot of times, sometimes a little explanation goes a long way. It really does.
Absolutely. Yeah, my wife talks about this a lot. She talks about male pride in society, and a lot of males in general being too proud to be wrong. And it's like, look, we're fallible people. We have to have reverence towards other human beings. To quickly jump and say, this person is definitely a criminal is a kind of a leap beyond, I dare say, the officer's job, right? Because they're not a judge, they're not a jury.
Well, and that's problematic as well, when people all of a sudden assess someone else without any factor whatsoever, and that's kind of I don't know if you could say, I think, somewhat prejudicial.
Mm-hmm.
If you judge people without having factors, that can become somewhat of a prejudicial way you do law enforcement or anything.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a set of facts that identify traits or what have you first and foremost. A criminal is a person that commits crime. That's what a criminal is.
Yes.
And simply someone walking down the street, and if you don't see a crime that's happening, you can't label that person as a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
You can't label that person as a suspect if you don't have anything to associate him or her with criminal activity. And that's where we get to a problem with, I stopped you because you have a cracked tail light. Do you mind if I look in your vehicle? Excuse me?
Mhm.
That becomes problematic, because now you're looking to create something. You're looking for something, so it's a difficult thing that we're going through right now. And if we looked at things the way we're supposed to, law enforcement, they will tell us that law enforcement is a proactive entity, and I kind of disagree with that. We should be somewhat reactive. If we're proactive, that's where the problem comes in. Because, give you an example, proactive, I have heard our watch commanders before we leave will say, all right, we're in a graveyard shift. The person that brings in a felony gets to go home early.
That incentive stuff really bugs me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It really bugs me because, right, why have incentives like that?
Mm-hmm.
If your community is really thriving, what's the point of incentives? Right? If you don't have to arrest anybody, isn't that
the goal?
Isn't that the goal? That's the goal, right, guys? And gals?
There's no problem with it.
Yes. That always blew my mind, of incentives. And, I've gotten pulled over and, gotten tickets before and stuff like that. And, officers just say, oh, yeah, incentives, I had to get, X number of tickets and da-da-da-da-da. So normally I'd let you slide, but I got to give you a ticket today. I had an officer literally tell me that. And I couldn't say anything because I was just blown away by it.
Well, LAPD just had a major lawsuit, and it was in the papers that one commanding officer did put quotas on her officers, and the officers, bulked back and filed a claim against her because she was a commanding officer, and she would take people's motorcycles away from them if they did not have certain amount of tickets. And so obviously they won the lawsuit, and people got paid behind it, and law enforcement officers got paid because some of them lost their ability to ride a motorcycle because of this commanding officer's quota system. And and who pays the price for that? Everybody driving down the street, because they're going to stop you for everything they can, even though it may not be advantageous to anyone to stop this person, but they say, well, in order to justify my means, I have to write all of these tickets, or else I'm going to lose my ability to work this unit. that's a problem.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ethan, you were about to say something.
No, it's just really frustrating, and I wonder, like, what myself, I would feel that it would be an unsafe decision to resist a situation where I felt that I was being unfairly targeted. It would probably be better for my long-term health to go along with a search that is not necessarily needed. But like, I mean, what is your advice for people? I mean, because you've been on that side, you know, you've been in that situation where you've probably worked with folks that, you know, are just gonna stop somebody just because they can, and you know what, we're gonna find something, and you know what, I'm gonna ask to search this vehicle, and if you say no, guess what? Now you get a drug dog that'll come out, and then the drug dog's gonna, you know, do the thing, walk around your car, and I don't know how I feel about that anyways, like, because I feel like that
It incites, doesn't it?
yeah, I mean, well, it's you know, the animal is trained to detect, you know, a substance and gives a cue to his trainer based off of that. But like, I just feel like there's so much room, like for the average citizen, there's not that much protection in the way that there's a lot of room for, and you talked about this, you know, in the book, you know, corruption. Like there's room for corrupt practices to happen in situations like that. So is your advice still then to just go ahead, just comply, just let them do what they need to do, and you know, just live to see another day? Or would you tell them to, you know, no, dude, you're not getting, you stopped me for some BS reason, like a cracked tail light. Okay, that's great. I mean, I can get that fixed tomorrow. I can go to AutoZone and get that fixed tomorrow. But like, I don't understand why you need to search my car. Like, I mean, what is the advice from someone in your situation who's been on the law enforcement side to civilians, you know, and in that situation?
Well, my advice has always been and always will be is for our people in the community to survive police encounters.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, as we have seen, there have been far too many of us that have been injured and lost our lives because of non-compliance. My thing is comply and fight another day. There are things in place such as attorneys with lawsuit, complaints through police department, and you know, exposure that we can fight tomorrow. But if we non-compliant, now you get into a thing where you may physically be removed from your car, and you know, no one wants to be physically moved from their car, and that's where the confrontation comes in, and that's where the loss of life comes in a lot of times, or the injuries come in, and you're not going to win that fight in the street versus one officer, 4 officers, 6 officers. You're not going to win that one. So you can call for a supervisor without verbally or physically resisting, but they're not going to let you get to that point. A lot of times they won't. And a lot of times the supervisor is going to side with the officer because that's his officer. So he has to save face with his officers because he has to be with them every day. They have a 10-minute encounter with you. And so he's going to side with his officers. So the thing for me is compliance, and let's learn to fight after the fact. Even if they're putting handcuffs on you, comply. Because eventually, if it is bullshit, eventually, maybe not that day, but eventually you're going to get your opportunity to tell your story. That's what's going on now with the cell phones. That's what's going now with the recording, the voice recordings and everything. Officers are being held accountable. In my time, we didn't have body-worn cameras.
Right.
My times, we didn't have cell phones. So it was always our word versus theirs. But now, you know, they even have apps right now where you can tell Siri, hey, Siri, I'm being stopped by the police, and your recording starts. So those are things that people can do right now. But I really, really, really strongly suggest that people comply. Even though you know it's wrong, even though you know it's not, they don't have the probable cause to search your vehicle, You know, you can tell them, no, I don't want you to search the vehicle while your camera is rolling. No, I don't want you to get me out of the vehicle while your camera is rolling. But to physically resist, no. I just say you have to physically comply because we don't want to be injured and we don't want to lose our life for the simple fact that we may get a ticket or we could have gotten a ticket and gone on about our way.
Mhm.
I have something to say about that in particular. Not too long ago, I read an article where basically these undercover journalists went into, I believe it was 39 different police departments to try to file a complaint. And in 34 or 35 of them, the police officers that were at the front desk that were there to take the complaints were trying everything in their power to not get this person to file a
Discourage
complaint.
them.
Yeah, discourage the
Dissuade.
complaints.
Yeah,
Yeah.
discourage, yeah.
And then in the end, they were only able to get, I think, maybe 4 or 5 of the almost 40 complaints filed because every police station, every precinct they went into was just trying their best to discourage them from even getting to the point of putting anything on paper, which I thought was very alarming, which makes me worry that in situations like this, even if we do comply and we make it to the point where it's like, okay, this is obviously wrong, and this officer knew it was wrong, but they did it anyway, and then we go to file that complaint, and then we get just stonewalled at every turn. I'm sure people have experienced this, and what would be your advice to them? Because it's just, you're already, if you've had a bad interaction with cops, you're already intimidated going into the police station, and then you see this person who's supposed to be a public servant and is there as the face to actually like help you with whatever you're there to do, and they're pushing back as if they're feeling offended that you would even want to file a complaint against one of their officers.
Well, what I say to that is this: you cannot, when you are going to be the subject of false arrest or unfair practices or excessive use of force, what you're going to have to do is follow up. And let's say you do walk into the station as these 39 sting operators did, but you have to follow up, and you can follow up, not only make your complaint to the local law enforcement officer, you can go to the attorney general's office, send the same report in a fashion of an email. You can send that same email to the mayor's office and the staff. Your local councilmatic officer, send that same email and complaint to the councilman in your area. We also send that to the chief of police so that you have an actual trail of documentation where you did send your complaint. And you just can't wait with some desk officer that is sitting at a desk or behind a desk. That's archaic and that's old, but it happens, but it does happen. In the Los Angeles Police Department, it became so bad that when we had the Christopher Commission's investigation and when we came up with the consent decree, we were forced to put complaint applications in every station, so you really didn't even have to talk to the officers. You get the form itself and pull it out and fill it out yourself, because that exact same thing was happening. People would come through, they'd make a complaint and find out that we never received the complaint. We didn't get one, or the complaint you made did not have the same facts in it. So LAPD came out with that thing where they would put out forms in so many different languages that you fill it out yourselves, because this has been a problem throughout history with law enforcement officers and law enforcement agencies, I should say. So, but nowadays, with the advent of computers, emails, and text messaging, you can go through so many different levels and let everyone know what you've done. You just let the attorney general's office know that you did send it to the mayor. Let the mayor know that you did send it to the chief of police, and let the chief of police know that you did send it to the watch commander. And if you have those levels, that your complaint really would, and you have to follow up by saying, okay, now I sent it in on the 10th. On the 15th, did you receive my letter? You can't rest, you can't quit, because you have to hold law enforcement accountable, or any agency or any thing we come across. You have to hold them accountable for your complaints and your concerns and make sure they get back with you.
Mr. Brox, I had a quick question about just to follow up on complaints. For those people who do exactly what you have just described, which is following up, writing emails to the Attorney General, making sure that you're leaving a breadcrumb of evidence that this is what occurred. For those who manage to get their complaints through, because we're seeing quite a number of police officers that have complaints, several against them. Have you seen them successfully executed in that way where that particular officer was reprimanded for their excessive force? I'd like for you to explain to us a little bit about what happens internally when you do get that breadcrumb, exactly how you need it, and there's no denying that this is something that occurred. Please elaborate.
Well, the Christopher Commission report and the subsequent consent decree that was a federal mandate, it identified heavy-handed officers, I guess for the lack of a better word, officers that had a number of similar complaints in their background of whether it's force or whatever it may be. And what happened was those officers were removed from current assignments or public contact for a certain period of time. Now, if the offenses were egregious enough, or if a specific complaint was egregious enough, they would re-investigate it if it wasn't investigated further, and then have what's called an administrative hearing for that officer to see if his actions warranted punishment, suspensions, or removal from office. I'm not going to say that happens all the time, but it has happened. And that's where that's where the Christopher Commission's report was really important. But remember that consent decree was only in effect for a number of years. And once they saw that the police departments were in compliance, they removed the consent decree. And now we're back to square one.
Square one again. So in reality, there is no system that keeps up with the amount of successful complaints, and then whatever the decision is by the department on how to best deal with that particular officer, it's just wiped clean at that point.
Well, I don't think, no, I won't say it's wiped clean, because if you've seen, they have been able to go into, because all of this is public information. An officer's complaint history is public information. So you have seen in cases on television where they found out, well, this officer that had his knee in this man's neck, he had X amount of complaints. Why didn't the police department do anything? Well, the heads of those police departments have to be held accountable. That's why you see chiefs of police now are resigning, that are being dismissed, because they didn't do what they were supposed to do in the beginning, or we wouldn't have a George Floyd incident. We may not have had that. We may not have had some of the other incidents that have come on, that have come across our television. Tamir Rice, I won't name them, but we all know what they are. But maybe we would not have them. So they are still there. It's not wiped clean. You cannot wipe an officer's record clean. You cannot. It's one of these things where we have to hold people accountable for what they do, in any agency. How? I really wished I could do that, tell you exactly how to do it, but I do have some ideas on, when you have an officer that has excessive use of force, where it doesn't reach to a level of termination or removal from office, put that officer in another assignment where he doesn't have public contact. Take him out of the field, bench him, because we've benched people before. We've put people on not even a desk. We have put them in a back room counting beans, so to speak. I know that sounds laughable, but we literally have turned them into clerical staff, which undermines the police department, because now you have 1 to 10 to 5 officers that could be assisting people in the community. Now they're sitting in the back office, doing clerical work, where we could have civilians doing that. But that's some of the things that you can do, hold them accountable.
Do you feel like in your career, do you feel as though there have been enough officers to have been put into those positions, or do you feel like oftentimes it does get looked over? I'll rephrase the question, but
when you say looked over, there's a lot of see, the problem is there's a lot of nepotism on law enforcement agencies, a lot.
You refer to it as favor in the book, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the problem is that my sins could be more than the sins of the guy next to me because of his relationship with brass, his experience. And see, because LAPD doesn't bring in managers. Our managers are commanding, they come from the ranks of police officer. So if you and I were police officers together, we lived in the same community up in Santa Clarita somewhere, and we go boating and fishing, and now I ascend to the level of a chief, and I'm still at the level of police officer, when my complaint comes across your desk, I've got to go fishing with you the next week. So I'll just say, okay, let me give you a little spanking, and then you go on about your way and keep your position.
Mm-hmm.
There was the problem. In lies the problem on law enforcement. And that truly happens. So I have a solution to discipline. I have a solution to internal. See, let me just segue into this. Think about what I'm getting ready to say. Internal affairs. Internal affairs is the administrative investigative arm of the police department and is staffed by police officers. So you're asking the police to police the police.
Who's watching the watchman? Yeah.
They're going to watch each other's backs. No one
Right.
wants to
Of course.
force.
So my simple solution to that is, in any time that you have major uses of force or in custody death, is that it is not investigated by the police department at all.
Mm-hmm.
We gather minds and intelligent people such as this panel. We put them in a room and we give them all of the facts. We supply them with the California state law and the penal code. We supply them with police officers training, and we supply them with policy and procedure. And we let you make the decision on whether or not there should be discipline in any case, or whether a shooting was justified or not justified. Because you don't have that issue, you take away the internal investigation. Because again, if I'm sitting on a panel and the guy that I go fishing with every day and camping with every week was there, I'm gonna have favor.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the solutions, that you can bring in independent investigators on major uses of force, in custody deaths and things of that nature. It shouldn't be done by police department.
Right. That I want to segue from that into favor and how much favor that you've seen from your experience, right? That white male officers have on the police force.
It's huge. It really is. Like take for example this thing called a SWAT unit, Special Weapons and Tactics. Mm-hmm. Well, what they go out to do is that they seek out officers on the police department that have worked assignments such as a gang assignment. They will take certain officers that have worked for certain supervisors from this gang unit and transition them into a unit called Metro. And Metro has several different branches. Like the military, they have C platoon, D platoon, which is SWAT, M platoon, K9 platoon, and all of these are in this division called Metro. And all of these guys have worked with and around each other for so many years outside of Metro. Is that here's the kicker. When an outsider applies to Metro, they have you supply, back in the day, was a Polaroid picture. They take it, I kid you not, they take your Polaroid picture and your application and they put it up on the locker room of the Metro officers. If your photograph is turned upside down, and maybe this young man who was in the military can see to this, if your photo is turned upside down or someone says, well, Michael Brox is not the person, I don't care if you're the most stellar officer in LAPD, you will never get into Metro because you're not one of the boys.
Right.
Metro is a good old boys division, and it's almost a police department within itself. They are the ones that were recently removed from South Central Los Angeles, and it was all on the news, where they took the entire Metro unit and no longer allowed them patrol in South LA because of some of the issues they had. Because, and that's really what it's all about there, and the favor and nepotism and everything else in this police department. And that's truly an example of it right there. And a lot of people don't know that, and a lot of people won't speak up about it.
Right.
But that's what goes on. And, you know, I did have some issue. I had some personal knowledge of Metro, K9, Mounted. I had personal knowledge of those.
Right. Yeah, and you tried to get into the K9 unit, right?
I took.
You did. If he elaborates in the book, he did a tremendous amount of training, like, you know, Rocky 4 level, you know, 2 montages, level of training, and then was denied for four different occasions when you tried, right? So it was like across how many years?
Well, actually, you know, without going into a lot of detail, I took 13 interviews to try to get into either K9, Mounted, or Metro, because all of these units are within Metro. Mm-hmm. So they take from within. They take from within to go to K9. They take within to go to SWAT. They take within to go to K9 and Mounted. So I was trying to get in anywhere I could, because I came on the police department to be a K9 handler. Mm. That's what I came on the police department to do, because in my younger life, that's what I did. But because I was an outspoken African-American Black police officer, my photo was obviously turned upside down.
Yep, flipped.
So therefore, I was never going to be in the Metro. And I give you the last interview I had with him before filing a lawsuit of unfair labor practice. The last interview I did, I walked in there, sharp as a tack, you know, well-schooled officer, and a lieutenant looked at me and said, "Why are you back here?" And I said, "Well, I'm applying for this position." He looked at the panel and said, "Do you have any questions for this officer? Do you have any questions for this officer?" They refused to give me an interview. And that was it. Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Because they weren't going to take me. And they said, "You're not going to get an interview." So those are the type of things that happen to within, you know, we took hell being within the police department itself. We went through hell. You know, people don't want to talk about it, but African-American officers, we didn't get those things called coveted positions. We weren't fortunate enough to get those coveted positions.
Right. So who was getting those positions?
White guys.
Yeah, I would imagine.
No white.
It's something that happens in the military as well.
That's what I was, when I asked you.
Unfortunately, it does. I mean, they're, you know, without revealing certain people because certain affiliations, but it, for instance, I tried to be a part of a certain division, and I had all the training. You know, I went through the schools or whatever. I begged my command, big time, to go through all these schools. Even though in the military it's a little bit different. You know, as a gas turbine technician, you're a firefighter, you do dewatering, you're kind of like an electrician too as well. You know, you are security, you're all of these elements, and then, you know, still trying to be a part of a different department that's outside of your normal scope of duties and responsibilities. I mean, for somebody to go through all the PQSs for that and achieve like high scores or whatever, but still be cast out from that particular department, or not even, you know, considered because you're not, you know, not the same as those other people. And I've seen other people who were not as qualified as me. I mean, I was training chiefs, okay? Chiefs as an E4 training at E7, okay? Mm-hmm. And I still wasn't considered. And you got Joe Schmo, who has about like 1 or 2 medals or accolades or whatever, and I have like 4 rows, and I'm only E4 and this person's E6, but because they're different to me, they got the position and I was just left in dust. So, happens.
And you know, it's interesting. It does happen. You know, I can tell you in all of the training that I did to prepare myself, the money I spent to prepare to be a K9 officer, the mappings, the everything. I mean, I went over and above what any other applicant would do to become a part of this unit. I had trained my own dogs. I bred my own dogs, went to shows across the United States.
Part of LARP as well?
Yes, Los Angeles Rottweiler Club. Was a board member for that, trained dogs and did everything. Matter of fact, I was a part of another training group that actually supplied LAPD with 2 of the dogs that I helped train. And one of the guys, one of the guys who was a head trainer, he trained under the guy that I trained with. So they knew who I was and they knew what I could do, but yet and still, not me. But I'm an old man now, and that's water under the bridge. But it's water that is worth telling the story about what I had to do to try and swim that lake.
Right. Absolutely. Kind of circling back to the whole complaint thing. I'm curious, what hoops do officers have to go through when filing a complaint about excessive force to internal affairs? I would imagine they have to report to internal affairs about excessive force that they witnessed from a fellow officer.
Well, that's problematic in itself. The most classic and public, example of that would be the Christopher Dorner issue. But I'll backtrack. One of the things that you don't do in law enforcement is that it's an unwritten rule that you cross the blue line. Right. There's a thin blue line, and you don't rat on your fellow officer because you have to work with them every day. You don't want to be ostracized. You want to ensure that you have backup when you need it, because if you're considered a rat, if you're considered a person that can't be trusted, then you're basically out in the field by yourself. And the normal practice, what I've done is I deal with that officer specifically. I deal with them specifically because if we don't deal with that officer specifically, they'll do it again in front of you. Now remember, I talked about early on, I was a person that had this little book. And I made sure that they knew that I wasn't with the excessive use of force thing. So they were really, really careful around what they did around me. I was shielded sometimes by my training officers to keep me away from that, so I didn't see it. But,
you referenced that in the book a few times too.
Yeah, I talked about that. But, in other instances where I dealt with the officer, and I'm pretty sure I got my point across to the officer, I was called into the office by the sergeant then to ask me, whose side are you on? You see, when I interrupted and actually physically restrained an officer from what they call is a C-clamp, when they put their hand here on someone's throat, I actually grabbed him and pushed him away from someone and told him, I have it. I've got him. You don't have to do that to this man. He's already handcuffed. Why are you doing this? So as that was over, I was called in the office by a sergeant and asked, what happened and whose team are you on? Whose side are you on? And I told him simply, I'm on the side of what's right to do. And if it's not right, I'm going to say something about it. So, you get your funny stares. Guys don't speak to you. Guys don't want to work with you. If they call your name and roll call and they said, hey, Brox, you're working with so-and-so over here. People will say, hey, can I switch partners? They don't want to work with you.
Slap in the face, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Because you won't stand for what some of the officers do. And again, I can't say that all officers do it, but there are enough of them where it needs to be addressed.
So is there any protection for officers that do want to report excessive force about other officers, or is it completely like a reliance on the public to do that? It's almost like you can't even do it, right?
Well, literally, you're on your own, because there is no, there is a portion in the policy that talks about retaliation. But, officers had to seek judicial review because they were retaliated against. They didn't get a special assignment. They got demoted for no apparent reason. They got their shift changed, or they were transferred and given what's called freeway therapy. They're working in the valley, but then all of a sudden they're shipped down to San Pedro to work for no apparent reason. So then they have to actually file a retaliation complaint. Now, here's the other complaint. You see, So in the department, that's our saving grace, but sometimes we have to go outside the department and get an independent civilian review, because the department will likely say, well, there was no retaliation. You can't prove that, because when you do file, here you go again. So you have to go outside and fight it that way, which costs money, time,
Oh, yeah.
and everything else.
That's discouraging.
Internal problems are why you can imagine the problems we have internally, manifests itself with the problems that we have externally.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Brox, I'd like you to talk a little bit about, I've heard there have been a lot of articles, a lot of reports on police unions oftentimes protecting officers. Is there anything that you'd like to say in reference to that?
In terms of protecting officers, the union is there as the union. The idea of the union is for bargaining and for, I guess you could say, salaries and benefits and everything else. But they have become a protective force for officers. Our union hires and takes on retention about 4 attorneys, and you pay an extra fee. I believe it's in your dues to be a part of the union, because you have to pay dues to be a part of this union. It's called the Police Protective League. You pay an additional fee for the use of an attorney, for the retention of an attorney. So let's say you pay a $10 extra fee a month that goes into a pool, so that if you do become the subject of criminal allegation or something that's going to go to court, that you have the use of the attorneys from the league. Classic example of that was in the Rodney King case. You saw each one of those officers, they had their own separate attorneys. They were all paid for by the Los Angeles Police Protective League, which was my money and everyone else's money paid for those officers' defense. So do unions actually contribute to problems? Yes, to a certain extent, without justification. They would like to keep the benefits they have, but when they get into the political arena, which they do, because they contribute a lot of money to certain candidates that are favorable in law enforcement and rules and policy and procedure changes, they feed those people and they support those politicians financially. So yes, it's a political position. They have a lot of power within police, so that is problematic to me. I hope I answered your question. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, you did. You certainly did. I put myself on mute so I can actively listen. But no, absolutely. I think a follow-up question to that would be, and in most of these reports, there was talk about how union leaders are often not led by Black officers, and how that paints a certain perception of a little bit of an us against them, even within the union and within the department of, as you mentioned before, whose side are you on? Are you on our side or are you on their side? So I wondered if you could kind of, I'd love to hear your opinion on why is it that you don't often see as many Black officers who are in positions of power within unions, especially in departments that are predominantly run, have a lot of officers who are minorities.
Well, in the case of the Los Angeles Police Protective League, we recently had our first, in the whole history of the Los Angeles Police Department and the history of the Los Angeles Police Protective League, we had our first African-American board member, which was a female, and she's African-American, Joretta Sandoz. And she is the first, and I was there 35 years, and people well before me, we never had an African-American even associated with the Police Protective League, except them taking our dues. But we often told officers, I was a board member of a Black police officers organization, the Oscar Joe Bryant Foundation, which we tried to do the same thing that the league was doing, because oftentimes we found that the league would not champion causes for us as Black officers when it came to promotions, when it came to coveted positions, when it came to fair and equitable treatment within the police department. The league was silent on our concerns. So we had a I guess, a movement in the 80s and in the 90s to succeed from the Police Protective League because we had no representative in there. Now, after all of these years, they have her, but yet and still, we still have the issues that we have because she is not the most open and honest and forthright person that we need in that position. She really isn't. And I care for her. She's a cool person, but she's just not a stand-up enough person for the rank and file of people that look like her on the police department.
Right.
That's real.
Which unfortunately means she probably played the game correctly and rubbed elbows with the right people to get that position. And now she's the figurehead to say,
Exactly.
and now you can't. Yeah, which is a shame.
I took sorry, go ahead.
Well, let me tell you what that position does for any member that's a board member or president. That's their 24-hour job, whether they're a sergeant, lieutenant, or not a captain, because they can't belong. You have to be lieutenant or below to be the league. But that's their Monday through Friday job. They have an office, beautiful office building. They no longer have to work in the field and do police work. They get credit cards. They travel the country in the name of police unity. They get a car, and that's their coveted position. They get the same salary and everything else. So if you don't have to work the field, you don't have to write tickets, you don't have to do employee evaluations, and you're sitting in this cush office where you get a salary from the police department and you get a stipend as being a member of the Los Angeles Police Protective League, why would you leave? So for her sake, the lady I mentioned, she is not going to go against the grain of the members that don't look like me. She's going to, side with their desires and everything else and their thoughts about the Los Angeles community and the political community of Los Angeles. So why would they leave? So that's why they stay there.
And
to
then
hold
probably use her as an excuse to say that,
There's diversity.
yeah, she's in this position, so you guys are being correctly represented. I mean, how could you not be if she's in this position?
Yeah, I had I took a course in my undergrad titled Black Politics, and one thing, my professor that kind of really stuck with me is, black faces don't necessarily mean black representation. And he would often say that about, studying history and studying, politicians, the Senate, anybody in command. And it's, it's kind of a sad thing. I did want to ask too, you were part of the police union in LA, right? The LAPPL, right?
You're asking me if I was a member or?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I was at the very beginning of my career when I saw that they really were not connected to us as black members of the police department. I took my membership away. I joined, and I was always a member of the Black Police Officers Association. But then when the Black Police Officers Association wasn't what I thought they were, I went back to the Los Angeles Police Protective League. And yes, I was a member, not a board member, just a regular member of the Los Angeles Police Protective League.
Right. Which he talks about in this book. When you kind of got in that terrible situation with a family friend,
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was gut-wrenching.
Yeah, it really was. It was hurtful. I still have residual effects from that to this day. It was without bringing, as my granddaughter's running right by me right now. Without going too much into detail, yeah, I did find that the Black Police Officers Organization failed to help me as much as they possibly could. And then when I went, I guess, groveling back or crawling back to the Los Angeles Police Protective League, They helped me and to hold on to this job when it looked like I wasn't able to. So yeah, it was difficult, and it's still difficult to talk about. So I know that was kind of an opening statement and not so much of a question, but if you have a specific question about it, I'll answer it.
Right. Well, one thing I want to kind of circle back to that is, did because you were part of the Joel Bryant Foundation for many years, 20 plus. Have you seen that foundation actually help any officers that you know of?
Not specifically, and not specifically. There's a lot of talk about helping officers. I know they have a scholarship fund that they do, but specifically a specific officer, no. Give you an example. There was a guy by the name of John Hunter, John Hunter was one of the top narcotics detectives on the Los Angeles Police Department. He looked like me. He was an African-American, well-matured man who had a number of experience and trained lesser experienced detectives and everything else. Now, when it was time for him to be at the top step of detective, he was constantly looked over and passed over by less experienced officers. Well, he went to the Oscar Joel Bryant Foundation for help.
Right.
They turned their back on him.
Like they did you.
He went to the Los Angeles Police Protective League. They turned their back on him. And who originally helped him was the Hispanic Officers Organization, which is called LALE. LALE, and the women's organization La POA, which for right now, I'd have to write it down to tell you what that acronym stands for. Los Angeles Police Women of Law Enforcement or something. Those are the people that helped him. Hunter LALE lawsuit. And then LALE was a Latin Officers Association. They helped him and got him the money and the attorneys in order to fight the Los Angeles Police Department and file a major lawsuit of discriminatory practices against LAPD for him to get the position he deserved. But the Black Police Officers Organization and the Los Angeles Police Protective League actually did not and refused to help him.
Which was the same case with you, right?
Exactly.
That you detail in your book, which is unbelievably disheartening. And I've often heard, do you feel like that's kind of that crabs in the bucket mindset?
100%. We have some African American command staff who literally will. Hold on for a second. Let me just hold on. She's trying to grab something there. Come on.
I feel your pain. I have a 15-month-old that literally cannot get out of any.
So yes, we have those command staff officers that basically they stay within their others, they stay within themselves. They don't reach out. They basically tell us, "I've got mine. You've got to get yours." And literally, when we have reached out to them through our Black Police Officers Organization for them to actually help others that are looking for it, we get crickets, we get silence from them because they're looking for their next position and they can't be associated with a Black cause or what have you if they're to get their next position as an assistant chief or, and I'm not saying all of them, but there's a large majority of enough of them where there is a problem. They won't stand, they won't, you won't see them on national TV speaking out against this because they're afraid that their bottom line is going to be affected by it. And their position is more important than standing up for truth.
Which is the complete opposite of everything that you would imagine they should be representing.
100%. 100%. And, and that's literally the way it is now. And so you can see them across the countries now where they're headed other police agencies now and, headed other police agencies. And that was their goal, is to get there. But if they stood for justice and stood for their brother man here in Los Angeles, they probably would not have been successful in reaching the goals that they reached in their lives elsewhere.
That's hypocrisy of the highest degree.
Yep. That's what we're internally and externally. We get it from both ends.
Yeah, that's, oh man.
I'm retired.
Yeah. Thank the Lord. Wow. Jeez. Man.
And this is coming from things I know. I know personally.
Right.
This is nothing I read. This is things I know. This is things I'm telling you are things that I know for sure.
I know.
I've experienced.
It's like you see it in movies and stuff like that. It's just like, how do people come up with these crazy stories? Like, nobody would go through that. Actually, it's like, here it is.
Yeah. Well, I hope that the book was somewhat informative, on what we have gone through. I hope that it was somewhat entertaining. I don't know if I was. I tried to.
It's very entertaining. It's a straight page turner. I flew through it.
That's good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
It was a bit difficult for me to find. Amazon was saying it wasn't going to get here for like 3 weeks, but I ordered it and it'll be here in a few days. So I'm definitely going to give it a read.
Yeah.
It should be interesting. I just wanted to tell the stories, and this book was published a year or two ago now. And it had nothing to do with what's going on. Well, everything that's going on, but I had none of this to build off of that we're seeing today.
Right.
And I want to say this. I really want to say this. Everyone is saying, well, X amount of people have died in police custody. Do you know these things have been going on when I was a kid? I'm 60 years old, and these things were going on. We just did not have, it just wasn't recorded.
Right.
We didn't have body-worn cameras. We didn't have cell phones to record it, and so this is nothing new. If you look at some of the old footage, from the 60s and everything, you see some of the same issues we're talking about now.
Yeah.
Heavy-handed police, no accountability. Things have happened even in recent times in this Christopher Dorner issue.
Right.
We had officers that fired their weapons over 105 times at 2 women in a pickup truck
In Torrance.
that they thought were Christopher Dorner. Do you realize that there was absolutely, positively, 100% no discipline on those officers that fired over 100 rounds at a truck where they didn't know what the suspect was? These officers are still on the job. They're still patrolling the streets of Los Angeles. 100, I think if I'm correct, they found 106 impacts that fired. That meant 3 officers. That means that each one of those officers had to reload his weapon and fire again.
Reload. Yeah.
With the target, which they did not know what it was. And if you look at the policy and procedure, that was way out of policy and procedure.
Yeah. It's just lucky those 2 old ladies didn't die.
That was the use of deadly force. And literally,
No probable
they're
cause.
still controlled. Yeah.
What was your reaction talking about the whole Chris Dorner case when that happened? I know you commented on it a little bit. She's trying to get to the phone now?
Yes.
What was your reaction when that Chris Dorner case came about? Being on the force during that time.
Now, remember who Christopher Dorner was before the actual actions that he took or alleged that he took, and I'll leave that alone. And I'm gonna tell you about it in a minute. He was basically a whistleblower.
Right.
And we talked about that a moment ago. And what he was is he said, okay, my training officer kicked someone unnecessarily. But their claim is that he did that because of his substandard work as a police officer. So you have, what side do you remember? What side do you take? So even the young man who got kicked said he was kicked. His dad said he was kicked. He had some mental health issues. A police officer said he was kicked. The training officer said she did not kick him. So what happened? They went after Christopher Dorner for filing a false complaint. They terminated him because of that. And he lost his ever-loving mind and did exactly the things that we saw him do. Now, one thing that we did not see him do, he said, I'm going to make you hurt. I'm going to attack your families. And those two beautiful children or young adults lost their lives in a parking structure. And I won't speculate on anything other than that, but they lost their lives. And in his manifesto, he told someone that his families were going to pay. I don't know how much evidence they had that he did it. I don't know if they have any eyewitnesses. I don't know if they had any ballistic matches, but they said he committed that crime. Now we know he shot the police officers. We know that. We have that on dash camera. We know that, and that in itself was asinine. And being trapped in the building in Big Bear, California, or somewhere up there, and being burned to death. I don't know if that's a police policy.
Never heard of that one.
No, especially when we were listening and they said burn him out. That sounds like Frankenstein and werewolf shit, where you go with pitchforks and fire and burn the monster. Normally if you have someone barricaded, we wait them out.
Right.
Normally we wait them out, use other means to get them out instead of setting the house on fire and burn them to death. But we've done that on several occasions before, where even murderers and whoever, we've waited them out, and for hours and hours. That's what we've done in the past instead of just setting a place on blaze. Now that wasn't LAPD that did that, but that was California law enforcement that set a house on fire, and you hear them on the news and you hear them on it and burn it down. So I don't know.
You didn't even give that suspect, like what you talked about earlier, that suspect the chance to be seen in court.
Yeah, they were
All rights.
Yeah, all right.
Judge, jury, executioner, right there on the spot.
Done, finished, man. And like you were alluding to, we didn't know all the, like I'd like to see, all the evidence. But we'll never have a trial, in regards to the miners that were killed. I mean, it's absolutely awful. I'm not trying to say anything about it, but
I'm not condoning his actions by any means.
No, never. I'll tell you this. Let me just interrupt real quick, and I'll say this so everybody understands me. If you prove to me that man killed those children or those young adults in cold blood the way he did, and those police officers, even though I understand what he went through on a police department, I would be the first one in line to vote to have him die by death penalty. I believe in the death penalty, and we'll leave that alone and we'll go on. So just so you understand that. So go ahead.
No, I understand. I mean, it's just, it kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, where, you have a suspect, and the job of law enforcement is to bring, suspects in to, help enforce laws. And with Dorner, like, there wasn't really a chance for him to have a day in court. And I mean, you can say all sorts of things and whatnot, but it's just, there's a lot there that doesn't seem right. There's a lot that seems fishy about that whole situation.
We as law enforcement have issued out so much street justice that it's mind-boggling, and that's not what we're there for.
Right.
We're not there to issue street justice.
It's not the job.
Not our job at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a problem.
Yeah. Transitioning to kind of perception and manipulation of facts. You elaborate in the book about stat manipulation. And a lot of people, when they make arguments nowadays, will go to the stats, and the stats speak for themselves. And, if this stat says this, then, it's hard fact. It's objective information opposed to subjective, right? And they try to, that's their defense. I want you to speak a little bit about the stat manipulation that goes on, and I want to ask, how inaccurate do you believe the stats of the LAPD are reporting?
I believe that they're very, very inaccurate. And I, as a detective supervisor,
Right.
We had a monthly thing called a ComStat, which was a computer stats, and we had a meeting, an entire city of Los Angeles meeting where all supervisors would come in and leaders of the department, and we talk about crime trends. We talked about strategies to reduce crime. One of the things that we did is that every report that's made goes by a thing called a Uniform Reporting Act, and we go by this thing and give you an example of what their Uniform Reporting Act is. A very simple example. If you have an apartment building, college campus, or what have you, and over the weekend, let's just say 20, 30, 40, 50 cars are broken into, the windows are smashed, and they happen over the weekend, well, LAPD would have those stats to made that if you can show that the modus operandi, the time, the place, and location was relatively the same, you can assume that probably one person is responsible for all of those crimes. You can choose that as one crime, not 20 burglaries, not 30 burglaries, not 50 burglaries. You can choose that as one incident.
Wait, so you don't really
Understand?
have to prove, you don't have to prove that
The
Is it all?
stats
these are
are
separate
right.
people.
Yeah.
Not at all. If it is considered at the same time, same location, same pattern, it's probably the same suspect. So a property crime can be considered as one incident. You gather them all together at the same time on an apartment complex, that's one incident. That's
So
one incident.
we'll
And we
never
would
know
have to, instead of
we'll never
having
know the
20
true number.
burglaries, you have one.
Oh boy.
Now
All right.
crime appears to be down. That's on property crimes. Now, crimes against person. The most classic one I heard about, and one of my colleagues was doing it. Let me make sure I say it right. An aggravated assault. An aggravated assault is one which is likely to produce great bodily injury or death. That's called an ag assault. That's what we called it. So in one incident, they had him reclassify this from an ag assault to a simple assault because an individual was hit with a machete, but he was hit with the blunt portion of the machete versus the sharp portion of the machete. They hit him in the head with the flat, blunt part, and it did not cause the damage that it would. So they called it a simple assault versus an ag assault. You follow what I'm saying? So because, and that's what he had to change it to, and we had to do what's called a reclassification. And I found that laughable. I was like, you guys have to be kidding me. And I talked to him about it, and he and I, we agreed. And that's just two classic examples of the way we call cooking the books. That's what
And
we
is-
used to call it as supervisors. We're cooking the books. You know,
Is that
I
done
can talk a
because
little bit.
is that done because it reflects better on the department as a whole in terms of the job that the department is doing in the community?
Absolutely, 100%. Crime is down. We're safer. So they're feeding you a false narrative that you are actually safer in the city of Los Angeles because instead of having 20 car burglaries, we only had one at this location. Instead of having 7 ag assaults, we only had 6.
Right.
And that's
There was
what it's
God
called.
knows how many actual.
And if you take that
Versions.
citywide
Yeah.
and division-wide and you keep doing that, keep doing it month, and you know, we just weren't done there. We had to do it at the division. So at our divisions, when we would turn in our stats, the commanding officers would say, well, this one and this one, let's change this one to that. Let's change this one to that. Even when I worked at crime, I worked a unit, the sexual assault unit. I was the boss there. We were changing titles of reports.
That was over in my area. You were at Devonshire, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm in Granada Hills, so that's like
Yeah.
right down the street.
I ran that unit at Devonshire and at Mission. So, it was something else to see. They said, okay, how many of these did you have? How many actual rapes did you have? How many sexual assaults did you have? How many rape by foreign object? It's just those things, facts were changed and twisted and manipulated and everything else because of the thing called CompStat. And because they were done is because the commanding officer and the detective threes like me your feet were held to the fire for doing this. And so if you can't keep your stats down, and I argued, well, they are what they are.
Yeah.
You know, the stats are what they are. I don't have anything to do with if a man got hit in the head with a machete. You know, we have to more proactive police work with the places of car burglaries where we know they have. We have to do more police work around there. A better presence, more omnipresence of law enforcement, maybe to, you know, suppress that. You know, instead of stopping the guys with the cracked tail lights, let's go over here and sit on this apartment building to keep people from breaking into cars in this apartment building on this college campus, you see. So that was my argument. I wasn't the most popular guy at CompStat meetings around.
I would imagine.
Speaking of college campuses, I was formerly the head of campus safety and security at the same institution that Anthony and I work at. That's very interesting because some of my training came from like police department in terms of crime reporting and the classification of the crime, how to report that, the numbers. So basically, any report that I shared with North Hollywood or Burbank Police Department could be skewed.
Could easily. But see, the report itself is never going to go away. The report itself will always have a divisional record number, which is called the DR number. It will always have a number. But for the purposes of counting it, what we would do was reclassify it. The report never went away. We would reclassify it. And we would clump it in with a bunch of others, because if you, in your campus, if you had as we just described, if you had 5 burglaries on the same day, that's only one incident.
Right.
And, you know, that's one incident. And that's what they would do because it's by the same location, same general time, by the MO, modus operandi, you know, it appears to be by the same suspect. So we can classify that in our categorization as one incident.
Wow, just thinking back, it makes perfect sense because sometimes for comparability, I would look at their report and then I look at mine. I was like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. In this category, it was originally 12 in my report, but I see now an update, it's only 2.
Mm-hmm. It's the same thing as a business complex. If you're in a high-rise business complex and someone breaks into the place, they kicks in the door of this business, kicks in the door of that business, kicks in the door of several different businesses, 12 businesses on the first, second, and third floor, and they do that in one weekend. It's only one burglary. It's not 12 or 13 burglaries. That's only one. That's the way LAPD does their stats.
The gravity of that, when I read it, I almost dropped the book. Like,
I'm telling you.
it's unbelievable.
And,
that's right.
And that's from, if I recall, that's from an NYPD
right, CompStat, right?
thing.
That's where Steve Bratton brought that in here.
Right. So I mean, it's possible that that's happening in lots of different places all around the country as those NYPD officers are.
Because they took that module from, you know, he brought that module in to reduce crime. That's why he seemed so successful when he came here. Right. Because he was the chief of CompStat and the chief that brought crime stats down in Los Angeles.
Well, I mean,
it's all smoke and mirrors.
Right. And Anthony and I were talking about this. We were actually talking about this last night. Could it be possible that, because, you know, during the 90s and the early 2000s, there was this kind of reduction in crime in New York City. And is it possible that the reduction in crime that was seen was actually just people, you know, flipping these numbers, tweaking their stats or whatnot to give? I mean, and if that is the case, I mean, talk about conspiracy. I mean, this is like Hollywood movie status stuff. You know what I mean? It's just.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I've been approached.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I could definitely see this book being turned into a movie.
Yeah. It's wild. That's man.
Boggles the mind.
We sit on a mountain of lies, you know, like when it comes to public safety in a sense, you know, like if things like this are widespread and rampant throughout the whole country, you know, it's just like, wow.
Well, people want to feel safe, and we all want to feel safe within our homes and our communities, and we look on the only conspicuous form of government there is to us, and that's law enforcement. That being one of the judicial branches, a branch of judicial government is the law enforcement, and basically that's the only tangible portion of government that the everyday person can touch is law enforcement.
Right.
So we look for them to provide us that with our community meetings. What are you doing about the crime in our area? So once we say, okay, this month you're down 9% in reduction of Part 1 crimes or burglaries or sexual assaults. They're like, great, sexual assault, rapes, or what have you, all of those are different categories. So people want to know, what about sexual assaults? Well, you're down 6% from sexual assault because a rape may not be considered a sexual assault. Sexual assault may be, a butt grab or a crotch grab or something like that. And so if you don't have those, you'll say, hey, sexual assaults are down by 60%. And people don't think, well, what about the actual crime of rape?
Right.
They don't think to ask the question. So the stat game is something else, and it really is. The stat games, facts and stats, sometimes they're two different things.
Wow. That's wild. I
Yeah.
mean,
That's alarming because it's supposed to be a measure of how good that the police department is doing in the community. And if the community is reading these stats and they're thinking everything's all hunky dory, meanwhile,
Completely
there's
ignorant of
actually a burglar out there.
reality.
There's actually somebody that's sexually assaulting people out there, or the numbers have gone up and they're thinking they're safe. There's no baseline, which is insane.
And even with the filing, we could talk about deputy district attorneys right now. Well, we'll talk about the district attorney right now. All of them are elected. They're elected to their positions, and all of them have to have the best record possible. They will say, well, I have 100% conviction rate. Well, understand that they don't get every single case that the police department wants to present to them. The district attorney,
they're not going to take on cases they're going to lose, right? Because it'll affect their percentage, right?
He's got it. It's perfect. And I think we all knew that, but sometimes it's worth saying and people don't get it, because if they see a case that's going to take some work, they're not going to take it. They were like, no, it's a reject. You'll heard the thing of DA reject. And they'll reject a case where it appears that there's going to be a fight, because the district attorney's office is like, we're not taking the chance on messing up our DA's record. We want 100% filing rate on sexual rapes or what have you. So if it is one of these, not a stranger, but acquaintance rate, they're not going to take those. They're not going to take them because they're like, okay, there's too much work to be done, so we're going to reject it. And here you have, that's why women are not filing, or they're not filing cases, because they're like, nobody is listening. I told the police department and nothing took place, because the district attorney of Los Angeles has a policy. If we can't prove it, don't take it. If we're going to have a problem proving it or conviction, don't take it.
Right.
And we went into that.
And that goes for anybody that's listening that may be wrongly convicted for something too. Lawyer up, If you know that that's a fact too, and you know that you're wrongly convicted, lawyer up and just comply and just have your lawyer do the talking. Because they don't want to go against a case that they could lose.
Well, I'll say this, and I know it doesn't need to be said, but I'll say it just in case someone is listening that doesn't understand this. If you are detained for a crime, remember, if they read you your constitutional rights, and remember, that's what it is, your rights. Ernesto Miranda, that's your right. You have the right to remain silent. If you talk, if you give up that right, and they'll warn you, I'm giving you a warning, that if anything you say to me can and will be used against you in a court of law, and people still talk.
Yeah.
Zip it.
Well, I
It's
actually
not
have a personal story with that.
I got arrested
and
and I talked, which was the Because they're, I mean, look, a lot of the detectives are very persuasive. I also I got my case thrown out because it was complete phony baloney. It was complete bullshit. But I lawyered up and I did the thing because I know I was in the right, and it got thrown out.
Well, I've also
But I complied.
heard
I
about that
complied
as well. And in regards to that, staying silent, it's not only that it can be used against you, but in my case, it can be, what's the word, sensationalized. So I got arrested, basically for getting pushed into a police officer while trying to break up a fight. While I was in
I remember this. Yeah.
And I ended up getting taken to jail. But prior to that, I was in the back of the cruiser, actually asking the cop why I got arrested. And he's like, "Oh, you hit me." And I was like, "I didn't even know you were in the building. First of all, you came in here, you didn't announce yourself. Came in the back door behind everyone, and nobody knew you were there. So when I get pushed into you, and then you immediately tackle me, there's some sort of disconnect there." And I'm like, "Hey, look, I'm a student here," because he was a campus police officer. "I'm a student here." And then he interrupts me and he says, "Okay, so that means it's okay to hit me." Mind you, I was not Mirandized as well. I was just taken and put in the cruiser. So after all of that, I have to spend, it's a long weekend. It's a Memorial Day weekend. So I get arrested on a Thursday or Friday night. So I have to stay in there until Tuesday because nobody's in court on Monday. Come Tuesday, we get seated in front of a judge. This cop goes up on the stand. And I'd like to point out that his witness was also a cop that wasn't even in the building. That's the guy he decided to bring with him because nobody else was available. So this guy obviously didn't know what went on inside of the house. He gets on the stand. The judge asks him what happens, and he tells this story that makes him seem to be some sort of a Superman police officer. He's like this 5'10", probably 220 pounds, like portly guy. So he says, we approached the apartment from the rear. I grabbed him by the shoulder. He turned around. He is referring to me. He turned around. He had this wild look in his eye, and he just railed back and elbowed me in the face. None of this is true, by the way. And then he says, and I immediately jumped up and grabbed him and took him to the ground. Mind you, I'm 6'3", 220 pounds. This is back when I was in the gym 3 or 4 days a week and playing basketball every day. So if I hit you full steam, you're going to go down. And then after that, remember the story of me in the cruiser talking to this guy. And then after that, what he said was, and then when we were in the cruiser, he told me he thought it was okay to hit me because I'm a police officer. Yeah, or he thought it was okay to hit me because he's a student at the university, which is a complete twist on what I said. I told him that I'm a student here, and I asked him what I was doing in the car. So take that very seriously, your right to remain silent, because it's not only that they'll use it against you in the court of law. This is not all cops. I obviously got paired with a really shitty police officer. They can say whatever they want, and it's your word against theirs. Now, I got very lucky. I was blessed because I had a judge that was able to sniff out the bullshit, because it's obviously an extraordinary story and completely counter to the story that I told. And also, there were 5 or 6 other witnesses I had around me that could corroborate the story. So yes, don't take it with a grain of salt. Be careful. I got let out on OR, which means I didn't have to pay bail or anything. I just had to do community service. But he was perfectly content to send me to jail on the federal charge, something that I obviously didn't do, and that could have completely changed my life in the worst of ways. So that's just. So that's a lesson in actually, exercising that right.
Share this with the ones that you love. Share this with your family, nephews, nieces, cousins, uncles, or whomever. There is no reasonable expectation of privacy in a police car. If you talk when you have handcuffs on without them asking you questions in a police car, they can actually record you and use that against you without Miranda. As long as they don't ask you any accusatory questions. If you start running your mouth and you're saying, I didn't do this, I was standing over on the corner on this side, I reached in my pocket because of, and they're not asking you any questions and you're just talking, that's admissible in court because there's no reasonable expectation of privacy in a police car. Even though there's detention and even though there's handcuffs, that's when Miranda is supposed to take place. But if you start talking without any questions or any accusatory or investigative type questions, they can use those statements against you. So what I try to tell people over and over and over again is the moment you get detained by law enforcement, be quiet. Because any little thing you say, they can try to use it against you. They could, and sometimes it works.
I too also wish I would have said nothing. It cost me a lot of money to get this baloney case thrown out. But yeah, I was facing some pretty heavy charges. Anyways, transitioning. I want to talk to you because we haven't touched the subject yet of George Floyd. Have you seen the whole 8 minutes and 46 seconds of the video? And I also want to ask you, how do you think the officers conducted themselves?
I have to admit that I have not seen the entire 8 minutes and 40-something seconds of the video. I didn't care to. I didn't want to see it. I have seen that before.
Yeah.
I have seen it before. But I saw enough to know that you treated this person less than a human being. I've seen it before. I've seen it so many times. I've experienced it. And it's just unacceptable what took place. It's criminal. That is what I talk about when a police officer has absolutely no reverence for human life. Even at the beckoning of those that were there, even when the body goes limp, this man was that calloused to put his hand in his pocket and to rest his weight of his body on a man's neck, which undoubtedly contributed and probably caused his death. There's no two ways of getting around it. It didn't seem right with me. Was I sickened by it? Yes. Anytime I see an unnecessary death from one human being to another, which is a homicide all the way around, and I can almost say that's murder, and I can 99% say it's murder, okay? 99.9% say it's murder, first or second degree, because you knew that your actions could cause death, and you callously went about it without any reverence for that man's life whatsoever. And that is what angers me. So no, I didn't need to see the whole thing. I saw that.
It's actually been taken down. You can almost not see the whole thing anywhere. Which we talked about 2 weeks ago on my podcast, is how quickly history is being rewritten due to certain sites how do we call it, saying it's like there's cursing or it's
censorship.
It's censorship. Sorry, brain fart. Sorry, censorship. And I find that a lot of times things are taken off, and history is being rewritten constantly because of censorship. And again, it's hard to get down to like the truth of things. But I did watch it the whole 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and it was pretty unbelievable. Which I wanted to ask you, as
why you used the word, and I know maybe we're just talking here, but why would you see that that's unbelievable? because you used the word, it's unbelievable. And I know you're saying that, make sure that I understand when you say it's unbelievable.
I just feel, this might be a personal opinion of mine, but I feel like censorship is a lot of redaction is happening with history. And systemically, it has the way history has been written as well. And I just think it's the same song. That's why I think it's unbelievable.
Okay, I get it. Yeah, it is.
It's another form of it, and I keep seeing that same form peeking its ugly head, and I see it, even in our digital age, I'm fearful of the digital age and history being written, because it's going to be redacted, censored. I guess when I'm experiencing it in my lifetime now, it just, I don't know, it affects me. I think about it a lot.
You would think we would take cues from history, like we're starting to see all of the stuff that we missed or that was omitted. And you would think that us as a country right now in 2020 wouldn't keep doing the same things, but alas, we keep seeing the same things being done. Not only with this, like censorship, obviously, if it's harder to find that video, it's easier for people to say, it happened so long ago. People lose like that visceral feeling they get when they watched it at first because they can't see it again. And then it just kind of fades into the ether, and the censorship allows this cycle to keep repeating, as we see with a bunch of different stuff in history. And it's just, that's kind of unbelievable to me that we still keep making the same mistakes.
Well, in law enforcement, they won't talk or train from these incidents. They won't open dialogue. They just defy, deny, and everything else that this was a problem, but they will not train for a positive outcome in the future for incidents like this. They won't use this as a training tool to say, this is what we're not going to do. This is what we're not going to accept. They won't do that because they're so busy saying that there was nothing wrong, that he was resisting, that something else contributed to his death. He was a criminal to cheapen his life. That's the things that people keep doing. But this is the same song, as you said, that keeps being played over and over and over and again. And as a kid in the 60s, I was born in 1960. As a kid from the 60s, watching the riots, the Watts riots, the civil unrest, and whatever else you want to talk about. I watched as kids were hosed down in Arkansas and other places in Georgia. You read some history books, so you've got to search it, of the things that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the things that happened in North Carolina, when they burned down the Republican led Black caucus in North Carolina in the 1800s. People won't talk about that stuff, and
they redacted from the history books.
They redacted.
I had to do my own research and take other classes that in college to really find out a lot about that stuff, or have somebody point me in the right direction. And it's taken out of the educational system, which we've had a few conversations where we talk about that, but it's like, it's so disheartening.
That's the exact thing that gives people the ammunition to say stuff like, oh, it happened so long ago, get over it. But there are still people alive that live through that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not, we're not far. Yeah. Like my parents are in their 60s. This is not far removed. These are experiences that lived by people that are still alive today. And for people to be able to say, get over it, is just that ignorance, because it's not in the mainstream. It's not in the mainstream curriculum of history.
My wife has a 106-year-old aunt, most beautiful lady you ever want to meet. She's still talking and everything else today. She lost people and relatives in the Tulsa, Oklahoma incident. She lost relatives there. So that is close to home to us. So no, we don't forget anything like that. We're not just getting over anything because it still hurts her. And she tells us about it. This woman is 106 years old and still able to talk and to bring things around when she was a registered nurse and could not touch white people. She could not serve. She was relegated after doing all of her college years. She was relegated to washing sheets and cleaning up blood as a registered nurse. She could not touch white patients, and this is her story, and an educated woman. But so people say, well, that's in the past. That's in the past. Well, in a certain sense, it's still going on today. I've experienced certain things, and not just on the police department and just regular old life. I've experienced stuff just, with travel with my family. So, people say just get over it. That happened a long time ago. Whatever. Stuff is happening now. It really is.
It's because it's not happening to you doesn't mean it's not happening. And I don't understand why that concept is so hard for some people to grasp. It's because it's not raining where you're all right now doesn't mean it's not raining somewhere else on the planet. It's just simple logic, but
it's
very simple logic.
Yeah,
it's a lack of wanting to understand, but also compassion, empathy, and sympathy. It's just, people don't want to experience it. They don't want to experience the hard stuff or talk about it or address it. And, it really needs to be talked about. Which I want to talk about, as a former African-American police officer, how does it make you feel seeing all these videos come up of excessive force, specifically targeted towards, African-American men and women? Does it almost become like an empathy overload seeing all of the videos?
I don't think it's overload. I'm empathetic, because of the fact that I experienced it myself, coming up. But I am somewhat glad that things are being exposed. I wish a lot of things are being exposed. I wish more would be exposed, because there are incidents that we have not seen.
Right.
There are tons of incidents. We talk about the most popular ones when people are losing their lives, but we don't see the ones where people are pushed to the ground. We don't see the ones where people are given the ticket for no reason. The people are not given an excuse, or the people are called out of their name, or what have you, by law enforcement. The unfair treatment in court systems around, where people are getting, different sentences from other people that don't look like us. There are things that are happening all over that are being exposed. So I wish everything would be exposed. So no, I'm not overloaded at all. Keep it coming, man. Keep it coming. The more, the better, so that we can make changes. And that's what this is all about, is that we as a society, we hope we can make changes, that we can live up to some of the things that we pledge in this country, the liberty, justice, and all those little, sayings that everybody talked about for everybody. But it has to be equal on the board. So if that means showing videos every other day, then so be it.
Yep. And again, going back to the ComStat talk, how many of these incidents are unreported?
Well, when you say unreported, I think that, in my time as a police officer, there were a lot of excessive uses of force that never made it beyond the incident that took place right there. It never went anywhere because of the fear of the public. The public were afraid of the police. They didn't trust the police. So why should I go to the police to tell them that the police are treating me bad? Mm-hmm. So, tons and tons and tons of things are being underreported. My own daughter had an incident where, she reported something that was happening with a traffic stop. We called a lieutenant to us. And we're like, wait a minute, how did you talk to the officer? And we're just now calling because he knew he did wrong. So the first thing he did was drove to the station, explained it to a supervisor, and she was expecting our call because he found out that I was a police officer and he knew I was going to call. And as soon as I called, the lieutenant defended his actions and say he did not do whatever he did. So therefore, you know, it's unreported. So she was like, no, it did not happen. That did not happen. So yes, there are tons of things that are not being reported. We're seeing the most popular. We're seeing the most recorded. There are people out there without cell phones. There are people there that don't get a chance to record it. You know, that's why body-worn video is really, really important. That's really important. And officers balked against that. They didn't want it.
Of course.
They didn't.
And that's another thing that I've been experiencing with these open conversations that I've been having people in person and on, you know, platforms like Facebook and stuff. They use these numbers. It's just more ammunition, because they'll say something like, the last one I saw, and I argued with somebody about it for the accuracy and the inaccurate portrayal of the numbers. Is like, okay, only 7 Black people have been killed this year, but then 42 police officers have been killed this year. And I'm like, okay, yeah, 7 Black people have been killed this year, but where are the assaults? Where are the false arrests? Where is the harassment? Like, all of that stuff measures up to harassment and overall police violence. And then that number, it's so easy to look this stuff up, but people don't do it. And then on the other side of that, they were like, and then 42 police officers have been killed just since the George Floyd thing. And they're like, why hasn't anybody talked about that? So there are, like you said, it's public record. You literally just Google one thing, and I went through the list, and yeah, there were like 42 police officers that had died in between that George Floyd in that particular period. I think it was like mid-June or something. And you will see that I think something like 45% of it were deaths due to COVID. And then I think 20% of it was like automobile accident related. And only 7 of those officers had died to gun violence, one of them being friendly fire. So
Wow.
You pair that number down from 42 to 6 or 7, including the officer with that died from friendly fire. Like, that narrative completely changes, but people won't take that extra step, and then they'll just push that narrative forward, even though almost half of those officers died from COVID-19.
I'm gonna interject something real quickly. I'm gonna jet off the screen because I gotta get a battery charger for my phone. My phone is dying. But I want to give you guys this website to go to, just so you can see. There's a website called the Officer Down Memorial Page. Have you guys ever been on it?
I have not. No.
Officer Down Memorial Page.
That's the one I was looking at.
ODNP. Yes.
Yep.
And it tells you exactly how officers passed away. You know, guys are dropping dead out of heart attacks and this, that, and the other. And you're correct. They'll use those stats to try and show, well, 40-something officers died during this, that, and the other. Nobody said anything. But if you really look at it, and then there's not always gunfire.
Mm-hmm.
You know, guys that are crashing their vehicles, guys are falling out of helicopters and everything else. But somehow that gets lumped into officers dying at the hands of others.
Yes.
So,
and it clearly states everything in line form it's in chronological order with the date and the reason, and all of that stuff is on it. It even has a pie chart in it to show, you know, where are the deaths that have been attributed.
I don't like talking politics, but just real quick, do you guys know that the most deaths ever, now remember, well, let me back up. The best president in the United States, according to some people, was Ronald Reagan, right? Just for conversation. Oh, everything was hunky-dory. Everything was great during Ronald Reagan. Oh, everything was great against the Bushes and everything. Look at the number of officers that were killed in the line of duty when Ronald Reagan was in office versus when others were in office. It'll be very interesting when you do your stats. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. So that's my political statement for the day, and I had to use their own stats against them a couple of times in terms of what happens. It's interesting. Okay, you guys forgive me for a moment. I just got to go get a battery charger for my phone.
Oh yeah,
All
go
good.
ahead. Yeah. Yeah, Eric's got to actually peace out too.
Yeah, sorry, gentlemen. I got to hop out. I got to talk to my daughter before she goes to bed. She's on East Coast time, so thank you guys for having me. Oh, Mr. Brock just cut out, but thank you guys for having me on it. I mean, it's very insightful. A lot of good information here. A lot of things to kind of think about and consider moving forward with my objective enrolling inside, Glendale Police Department. Very interesting. It's gonna be a ride.
Yeah.
Does
absolutely.
Mr. Brox know you're fitting to be a police officer?
I don't think so. I don't know if I touched on that. Oh, Nassau, Bahamas. That's where my family's from. Nice. Nice. Very nice.
Maybe he can give you a pointer or two before you hop off.
Oh, sure.
Don't hop off. Give me a few seconds, real quick. I got to do something else. I'll be back in less than 7 seconds.
No worries.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, this is, man, a lot of good information. I have the book on order and should be here July 8th. Yeah. Take a little while.
Order from Barnes and Noble.
I did it. I already ordered from Amazon.
Oh.
So,
Yeah,
Well, something happened, and then Amazon is now shipping it within 1 to 2 days. I don't know when that happened, but it was just all of a sudden.
well, I don't know. I didn't order it today, but I ordered it a week ago, and it's supposed to be here July 8th. So that's like 2 weeks. I don't know why it takes one book to get here in fucking 2 weeks.
And none of
I
the
ordered 2.5 weeks ago, by the way. I still haven't had it.
still haven't got it. Yeah, yeah. That was the
Anthony,
estimate.
you ordered
Actually,
through
hold on.
Amazon or Barnes? Are you saying do it through Barnes because you did it through Amazon?
Yes.
The latter? Oh, geez.
Go through
Okay.
Barnes.
That's correct. I'm sorry. It'll be here between July 8th and July 14th. So
Oh,
I'm just being optimistic that it'll get here July 8th.
okay.
I don't think it.
It probably won't get here by July 8th.
Unfortunately.
I'm back.
Kurt?
Mr. Brock, so I share with the group, the panel, that I am on a journey to join Glendale Police Department. I just kind of feel, kind of like I think Ethan hit the nail on the head, actually, a very sheepdog kind of mentality. And I do want to kind of, try my hand in the police department and see what ways I could be influential, especially with the skill sets that I have more specifically. And I think it'll be quite the journey. And especially now talking with you, there's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of things to really kind of think about. The full plate of information. I have to just go back and dissect and digest and see what components kind of will work, in helping me on my journey. So I do appreciate speaking with you today.
Not a problem. Well, good luck on your journey. Remember, basically what we are there to do, and I know you're a very intelligent man, is that we are there to serve, protect, and serve. And that's what it's all about. That's what law enforcement is all about, protect and serve. Stay within that realm, and I know you'll be successful.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Eric's got to leave. He's got to talk to his daughter before she goes to bed, and she's on the East Coast. So.
Yeah. Mhm. All right, guys. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of
Eric,
the-
talk to you soon. Yeah, I just have a few more questions to kind of go down or go over before, one is, and this is a question I talked to Ethan about, that he kind of came up with. How much are police reports manipulated by the officers, right? The paperwork that they actually file. When
Well-
filing out an incident report, right? Or any report that they would have.
Well, the way reports are supposedly written, there isn't much from the basic police officer. There isn't much in the way of personal opinion in these reports. So many different agencies write reports differently than LAPD does. Basically, is write a report where it's entitled "Officers Observation, Investigation," and that's about it. So basically, the observation is, the source of activity, the source of activity of how you got to where you are, and your observations and your investigation. And basically, it's factual. The only place that you can actually put an opinion on a report is a investigator's final report, which is what I do. But there isn't much in the way, from what I have seen, of non-factual information in report, because as a detective supervisor, I read all of the reports that officers completed and which had to do with my investigative responsibilities. And, there wasn't in the way of much of personal opinion in those reports. It was simply what took place. Now, how in depth they were is one thing. I've had people say, well, I wish he would have added this, that, or the other, but there isn't any, I guess, I can't say there isn't any, but I don't recall a whole heck of a lot of fabrications or anything else in these reports. It's when the investigations start is where you see a lot of things that aren't correct in the report from our side, not from the police officer side.
That's actually great to hear.
Yeah, it is. That's
Because, as, a civilian and everything, you often wonder, how accurate are these, is there bias in them? And it doesn't sound like there's much bias.
When you walk into a police station or you call for police service, you say, hey, my house was broken into. The officer's going to say, okay, can you tell me what took place? Well, I left at a certain amount of time. I came back, my front door was kicked in, and these items were taken. Well, there's not much of fabrication in those reports per se, because they have nothing to gain or to lose by that. Now, when we find the guy that broke into your home and we have to do search warrants, we have to go out and recover property. Now we have to present it to the DA's office, and if it's weak on itself, if the report is somewhat weak, now that's when potentially that we could fabricate on the investigative side, because we say, wow, we got this guy and we did some things wrong, or we didn't do this, we didn't cross that T or didn't dot that I. Let's just say we did, so that we make sure we get the conviction. That's not on the police officer. That's on the detective and the investigative side and the DA's office. That's when you can get fabrication of reports.
That's great to know.
Is there any check against that then? Like inherent in the system, or is it just kind of like you just?
Ethan, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
No, I was just asking, is there any check against that at that point, or is it?
Well, that comes through judicial review. That comes from judicial review. So when the way the system works for LAPD is that we have to take our investigative facts and turn them into the district attorney's office so that they can make a determination if we're going to go further in the criminal justice system with that specific case. And if things don't add up, that's when someone can say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. The guy we talked to said that no one actually came to his house and with a search warrant, but yet you're saying that we did a search warrant. We don't have any judicial review for a search warrant or what have you. That's when all of that can, from my end or the district attorney's end, that's when those things are caught. I've kicked back several reports because I'm like, nope, you can't do it this way. You're going to have to, eliminate this or take that out or do this or do that, because I know we didn't do this. It's a flat out, untrue. Did you really talk to this guy? Did you interview him? You're claiming that he admitted to this, that, or the other. Where's the Miranda warning? Where is this? Where is that? We can't use that because you didn't give him Miranda. He's been in jail. You've got to take that statement. You take that statement that he said he kicked the girl, take that statement out because you didn't tell me how you got that statement from him. You see, you didn't say that. So you're not going to put that in the report. That was my job as a detective supervisor to pick up on that kind of stuff. And whether that was an omission or whether it was a flat out lie or fudging on a report, I've had fudging on a report before, but it's not coming from the patrol side. It's coming from one of my investigators' side.
Wow. That's wild. Yeah. I mean, it's good that, that you guys are, I mean, I guess my only thing would be, it's again kind of like the whole internal affairs thing. You have to kind of keep yourselves accountable, but then you also have to work with the DA's office to, and they're going to be reviewing it as well. So you have multiple eyes looking on it at the same time, and if one of them finds something that seems a little fishy, it can kind of set off a chain reaction and be like,
well, you saw a lot of that in the O.J. Simpson trial. There was a lot of things that just didn't add up, and it turned into an acquittal because a lot of things did not add up. And police work, when it comes to sexual assault and murders and any crime, really, it takes a lot of work in order to prove without doubt that a person did something. And the system is geared towards reasonable doubt. And if you have reasonable doubt that the facts that we laid out are true, you can't convict according to the way the system is set up. And so that's where you run into problems. If you can't prove it without doubt, case over.
right.
And so it happens when people pick apart, and that's the job of the defense attorney, is to defend his or her client and their rights, to make sure that everything is done properly. And unfortunately, it works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't.
That's really interesting. That kind of leads into my next question is, as an officer, how much do you worry about liability when making an arrest? When I say that, I think back to watching the video of Daniel Pantaleo. Sorry, I'm botching his name. Pantaleo. When he had Eric Gardner in his chokehold, and the other officers it sounded like they kind of want to intervene.
Well,
they didn't.
I'm here. Okay, go ahead.
So, as an officer, how much are you worrying about liability when making an arrest or getting involved with, another officer that you're on duty with making an arrest?
Well, here, if you're in the forefront doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, and if you know that you're genuinely doing the right thing, you shouldn't have any worry about liability. You shouldn't. That should be the furthest thing from your mind. Because we're sworn to make arrests. We are given the power to arrest. We are given the protection to make arrests. But when you're doing the right thing, worry should not come with anything. If you're putting your arm around someone's neck and squeezing, you should really be thinking about that. And these officers, they get the mob mentality, and this thing is kind of like contagious fire when these officers are out there. And I know what you guys know what contagious fire is, meaning, oh, he shot. He got scared, so I got scared, so I shot too. Well, why did you shoot? Because he did. You don't have any other. No, he was shooting, so I figured there was something wrong, so I shot. So, and it's contagious where people just start getting involved. And that's what happens in a mob mentality kind of like that, where one officer is doing something and the other officers jump in because of that blue line, and they don't want to be thought of as the guy that just stood on the line when we're trying to arrest this, this guy selling cigarettes on the corner. We want to get in there and get our licks in too, because that's the way the field officers talk. They'll say, hey, if I'm fighting, you better jump in too. So do you want to be an outcast? Do you want to be looked upon at the roll call as the person that did not assist because we're all family? But that's what happens. That mentality takes over, and before you know it, you're involved in something that you should not be involved in. And the fact that you didn't try to stop it is important as well.
Right. Because that's going to come back.
It's going to come back on you.
Yeah.
It's going to come back.
And they will remind you.
But I don't think that, if you're doing the right thing, that, that worry never comes into your mind if you're doing the right thing.
That's interesting. Last and final question. What is your opinion on the rhetoric that I'm hearing a lot in the news of defunding the police?
Defunding the police. First and foremost, that word defunding doesn't necessarily mean dismantling by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Defunding the police, technically, we come up with these terms in the media and in a media setting. Defunding the police in the Los Angeles Police Department meant that they're going to reallocate funds from the budget to other areas of law enforcement or city functions. That's what defunding the police meant in Los Angeles. We may not give, $1.5 million to Metro to buy new horses or new canine dogs. We're going to take that money and put back into cultural diversity training. We may not give the police department a $20 million budget. We may only give them a $16 million. We may not give them enough money for overtime. We'll just have them do compensatory time. That's what defunding law enforcement means. Now, defunding and dismantling is something totally different, because we've had that here in Los Angeles where, for instance, Compton PD was actually dismantled. So there were so many things going wrong at Compton Police Department, no accountability, corruption, and then the city of Compton, where in the city of Maywood, I remember, and Bell, all of those cities had major problems. But what they did was they brought another law enforcement agency in to police where they could not in the city of Compton, such as the sheriff's department, because the sheriff is over the counties all over the city. So they could bring in the sheriffs to now take over what they did. So defunding doesn't necessarily mean a negative thing. It just means that they're going to readjust some of the monies to try and fix what the problems are.
Yeah, but then again, it's like you said, it's politicized. So
It is.
when people hear that, they just get that snap reaction like, oh, what are you going to do without the police? I don't think it's a great idea to dismantle the police, because obviously we need police, but there are obviously issues that need to be addressed. And, reallocating those funds sounds like a good idea, especially when the places that those funds are going to be reallocated are in the long run going to help relations between the community and the police. Like it can't be a negative thing. I just don't understand how it could be.
Well, it's interesting. Recently, and the same thing, defunding the police department, LAPD was deploying officers on a cash basis to ride on the metros, the Metro links, the subways, and the buses. LAPD officers would use that as cash overtime to make extra money. Well, in the budget and the defunding of police, they took that away. And the officers are screaming and hollering, they're defunding the police department. No, they're just not letting you work cash overtime. So are you going to work that detail for time? The officer said, no, I'm not going to work it anymore because you took my money away. It's kind of like, if I can't play by my rules, I'm going to take my ball and run. If you're playing ball in the gyms you're playing ball with, and the guy can't ball, but he has the best ball in the gym.
Right.
Well, if you guys don't pick me to play pickup, I'm going to take my ball and leave because I can't play.
Yeah.
That's what law enforcement officers did in back east, where all those SWAT officers left. That's what they did. We can't beat people. We can't treat people the way we have over the years. Well, we just want to play.
And that's assuming that these officers, like the trained officers, I used to commute back and forth I'm in the west side to downtown. and I would take the Metro Link because it literally dropped me off right under my office, and I would see those police officers in there, you know, maybe 3 out of the 5 days of the week. Now, are they getting the overtime pay as in time and a half, and is that why they don't want to do the compensatory time?
Yes, they get time and a half cash money for working that detail.
Wow.
Crazy.
And it was out of the LAPD budget. So now, because they were allocated that money to make this train safer, and they went into a budget with the LA Metro to ride on those trains and to provide the omnipresence of law enforcement to keep crime down on the trains, buses, and everything else, or trams or what have you. But now that they won't do that, the officer's like, well, I'm not going to work it anymore, because it was a voluntary thing. It wasn't an assignment. It was voluntary. So now that they take money away, the officer said, I'm not going to do it because you won't give me money for it.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, it's a bit troubling, because if there's crime that needs to be quelled on the Metro, like whether you're on the Metro Link or you're on the actual train, then there should be cops there regardless. It shouldn't be a voluntary thing that they're getting
Absolutely.
incentivized to do. Like, crime is happening right here, so in order to lower the instances of that crime, let's put police on it, not pay them to do this voluntarily. That's what makes sense to me.
It was the same thing with the airport when all of the things with 911 was happening, you know, after the terrorist attacks. They had law enforcement officers, LAPD officers, join up with the airport police and the police in the airport. But they were paying cash overtime for that. So everybody was fighting over each other to work that. Not because they wanted to protect their community, not because they wanted to serve. It was because they wanted to put more money in their pockets. Now, when they took that money away, it stopped. The officers would not work up there.
Wow.
That's whack, man.
You guys got interesting, isn't it?
Why are they really there? You gotta think
eye-opening.
about the intention of people, and
Uh-huh.
it's really disheartening, unfortunately.
Before we hop off, I know you said that was your last question, but I have one question. I listened to a lot of the Joe Rogan podcast, and he brought on this. He's what do I call him? He's an author. He's an entrepreneur. He was a former Navy SEAL. His name is Jocko Willink. And he actually goes into corporate environments and trains people using the military knowledge that he gained over the years, as far as, you know, discipline and leadership, and instilling those that into the actual corporate environment. He had a piece where he shared his thoughts on police brutality, and specifically the George Floyd case, and it is in regards to the use of force and the training. So his suggestion was that he's a big judo guy. He's into, or actually Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy. And his thought was that police officers should have the training in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, because that is the form that is, you know, most heavily reliant on takedowns and control of someone while you're on your back, or while they're on their back, or whatever. And it would give them, you know, the unconscious empathy and compassion, because they've been rolling around physically training with someone in use of force and being able to use their body to subdue someone. And as it stands, like, these illegal chokeholds that police officers are using that are ending up killing people, like Eric Gardner and George Floyd, could be curbed, because now they are in, you know, tenfold more control of their body and how they use their body in order to subdue someone. And it'll be way easier to actually subdue someone without lethal force. And even if they're implementing that chokehold, thousands of hours of doing that, or having that done to them, or doing it to someone else, will let them know where the limit is, where they need to let go, or where they need to ease up. And I think it's a really good, very logical thing, a very logical solution that could at least address issues like the ones that we're seeing with these chokeholds, or wherever these people are positioning their bodies on top of other people that are already subdued, ending in death. It would be, I could foresee it as being a tremendous boost in in the path to getting a solution to those kinds of deadly uses of force. Just wanted to kind of know your thoughts on that.
Well, LAPD does have what's called arrest and control school. And arrest and control has to do with wrestling techniques. And it's in the academy. Remember, it's in this short period of time in 6 months, and it's in service training as well. But in service training, it's only 48 hours. So you go there, well, not even 48 hours, really. You go for 8 hours, you go for another 8 hours, and you're certified in arrest and control, and so we actually get on the ground, you actually wrestle around with your classmates, and it's for the purposes of documentation that the department is teaching that, but there's no follow-up to it. You understand now? You said hours upon hours of training and getting used to this, but if you go to arrest and control school for even a week, even 40 hours, that's really not enough. But they do have, and they have implemented it. And remember, there's a dynamic with law enforcement that you have weapons on your body. When you tie up with someone, you have a firearm on your hip that you have to be concerned about as well. So the full gamut of arms, the full gamut of legs is not to your disposal, because you have to protect that weapon for it not to be dislodged or taken from your holster. So, there's a dynamic that maybe corporate doesn't have, but law enforcement does have that dynamic. But it is there. It's a great idea. I understand what you're saying. But the problem is you have to have reverence for life first and foremost, because if most officers are out here thinking, I don't want to tie up with someone, I'd rather, there's a term. What is that? Okay, I'm going to say this term. I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6.
Yeah.
You've heard that term before, right?
Yep.
Well, law enforcement officers all over the country use that term all the time. I'd rather sit in front of a jury, than let somebody kill me, and it's literal the way they carry themselves out there. There's officers in the books that have, I have heard them say, that was your opportunity. I don't want to read my whole book out here, but their officers have said that was your opportunity to shoot somebody on the police department. I didn't come on the police department to shoot anybody.
Right.
So,
Shouldn't be seen as an opportunity either. That sounds
right, but
weird.
I'm telling you, it's been said, and that weapon is the use of deadly force is an absolute last resort. And the weapon is not the only deadly use of force we have. If you hit somebody in the head with the metal pipes that we have called monadnock, a PR-24, a thing called an asp, which is a metal rod. Also, the upper body control holds that can actually be deadly if used incorrectly, as we've seen. So there's more ways that people have died in custody of officers than just the firearms. Officers are carrying knives nowadays, and they claim that they carry knives because if I'm in an accident, I can cut my seatbelt loose. You guys, there's a lot of things that are going on. We have a urban police rifle, which is called a UPR, which is basically an AR-15 or M16.
I've seen them on the back of the police motorcycles.
Yes, you have.
Either that or a shotgun.
Yes, those are weapons that they use, that we use, but it's one of these things where there's a lot of work to be done, you guys. I mean, and ladies, where is she? Is she still here?
Yeah, she's here.
I'm still here, just very much listening.
Oh, okay. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And you know what? You all are clear thinking individuals. You all have some beautiful questions, and they're questions that elicit solutions. So you all have the solutions. You all have some ideas to help things. And what I would challenge each one of you to do is to gather together, or individually, collectively, and put your thoughts of change in writing. Send it to your councilmatic person. Send it to your mayor. Send it here, because you never know. You never know that. That may be your thought, but 200 people may be thinking the same way you think, but no one actually does anything other than talk. Let's put it down in writing and maybe address our city councils, maybe address our mayor, councilmatic meetings and address them with it. And don't just talk about it, write it down and actually submit it. Who knows? It could be, and someone may say, hey, you know what? That's a great idea. It's a great idea, Anthony. It's a great idea, so and so. It may, you never know.
Right.
That's great advice and great point to end. Be active, right?
Yep.
All righty. Well, I want to thank my guest this week, Michael Brox. Thank you very much for joining us this week. And I want to plug again his book, Being Black and Blue, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.